Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 5 of What If Naruto Was Rebuilt, the Uzumaki clan. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. As smoke and the sounds of quiet bursts filled a clearing, Naruto placed a hand on his head while he swayed on his feet. He reached his hand out and leaned against a nearby tree as he fought his clone's exhaustion. The sky was colored orange by the setting sun as his training wound down. After his run-in with Akatsuki, he stepped things up a notch. He increased the number of clones to 70 and racked his brain for ways to get stronger. He thought he'd hit upon a good idea, though he'd have to thank Lee for inspiring him later. He took a deep breath as he steadied himself. The blonde took out his canteen and drank, quenching his thirst and soothing his weariness. "Pretty good progress, brat," Jiraiya said, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed. He shook his head with a smirk. "It still amazes me no one thought of this sooner. Anyway, let's head back to camp. The stew should be ready by now." "You got it, Jiraiya-sensei," Naruto replied as the toad sage turned, motioning for him to follow. The blonde quickly caught up with him. He frowned as his mind turned to all the reasons he needed to be stronger. Orochimaru and the Akatsuki. As he thought through his encounters with them, it reminded him that he had a long way to go. Though, he couldn't help but think how odd that brief showdown with Akatsuki was. They couldn't have thought of something better than knocking on his door and waiting for him to answer. And he really should have been done for the moment he opened the door and made eye contact with Itachi. He knew from his spars with Sasuke that there had been plenty of time to use those Sharingan to take him out. They probably didn't think I was worth more than that, bastards. Naruto thought. Oh well, their loss, and he was going to make them pay for it. "Well, here's our first stop," Jiraiya said, crossing his arms as they looked down on the city below, resting at the bottom of a valley. "From what I know, at least, this should be where Tsunade was headed. Hopefully, we can pick up the trail." Whoa, Naruto was only half listening. He gripped the railing as he took in the town below. It was similar to Konoha in style, but what enthralled him was the festival in full swing. 2 rows of stands stood at the center of the main road, and countless people filled the street. Paper lanterns hung from strings that crisscrossed along the buildings, waiting for nightfall. The Uzumaki's eyes shined with excitement, and he grinned widely. He'd never been to a festival before. Konoha had had a few, but, well, he'd stayed indoors. He hadn't been welcome. He couldn't wait to get down there and enjoy the sights. He was sure that they could spare a little time, right? It was a shame his team wasn't here with him. Sakura would probably be almost as excited as him, but she'd try to act responsible. Sasuke would be dragged to the stalls when he'd rather walk and take things in. Fu, too. The blonde was sure she'd love this. It'd probably be a first for her, too. He heard Jiraiya chuckle briefly and turned. "All right, kid, I can see you're chomping at the bit. Run along and have fun. I know where to start looking. And don't worry, I'll keep my eyes peeled for anyone in a certain black and red cloak if you get my meaning. Just don't burn yourself out. We'll pick up your training tonight, got it?" Naruto blinked, then grinned. "You got it, old man." And with that, he jumped over the railing, bounding down the stairs and cliff wall into the crowd below. Jiraiya chuckled and shook his head. Yep, he could see a lot of Kushina in Naruto. Though there were also some shades of his father there. He then bit his thumb and put his hand on the ground, summoning a small orange and black toad. "Keep an eye out on the kid, okay?" he said, pointing down at Naruto, who was barely a speck, but his blonde hair and orange tracksuit were still clear as day. It croaked an affirmative before following him. The toad sage nodded to himself. That and a few clones he'd sent out earlier should do it. He didn't think Akatsuki would try again anytime soon, but he couldn't be too careful. He'd thought about taking the kid's wallet. It wouldn't do to let the blonde blow through all his money, not to mention he might need some spending cash that he could pay back sometime later, but the brat had done a pretty good job with Zabuza's bounty, thanks to the Kakashi's advice. That argument would fall flat. The toad sage grinned. Now then. Naruto's eyes shined with excitement as he ran through the busy streets, his eyes roaming the stalls. He took it all in with a wide grin. The colors, the laughter, the game stalls, and the delicious smells of all the food on display, which mingled in the air. He came to a stop near the center, fists balled in excitement as his head turned to and fro. There were so many choices. He could play the games, look for souvenirs for Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi, or try all the food stalls. Oh, and they had festival masks. If you squint, they almost look like some Anbu masks. It was all so new to him, and he was going to make the most of it. His roaming eyes spotted a ball-scooping game, and he ran to it. No better time to get started. Hours later, Naruto laughed and laughed, one hand resting on the red and white fox mask that lay on the side of his hair and carrying a bag of goodies. They should probably ban ninjas from playing these games, they were way too easy, but that did nothing to dampen the joy of winning. Hell, he didn't even have to spend anything. He'd decided to try his luck at a lotto game they'd been running and won on the first ticket. If only his friends would have been there, this would have been one of his best days. It was still up there, but it was a shame that he was alone. He wondered how the Toad Sage was doing. The old man should have joined him by now, or so he thought. Well, what Jiraiya was doing was important. Naruto hoped he'd have some idea of where they should go next when they finally meet up. He held that thought as his stomach rumbled. It was time to fill up on festival food. He followed the smells and sounds of sizzling to a takoyaki stand helmed by a man in his mid-50s. Hey, Gramps, give me 3 helpings of takoyaki. Sure thing, just 3. Let me see how they taste first. Money was exchanged, and Naruto had his food. He took the first bite and hummed at the taste as he bit down on the savory treat. The Uzumaki sighed as he lay under a tree just outside the village, patting his full stomach. He'd sampled so many different foods and gotten more than his fill. He sat up and stretched before looking at the sky. It had to be at least 4 from where the sun was. Only a few more hours and the night would start to fall. He was a little disappointed, but it looked like it was about time to draw things to a close. Just one problem. Naruto crossed his arms and closed his eyes, humming before looking to the sky. Now, how am I going to find the old man? They hadn't set a meeting place, and he had no idea where Jiraiya went. He could probably wait for the Sannin to find him, but he wanted to know if the legendary ninja had found anything and maybe hang out for a while. All this wasn't as fun alone. With all of his prizes and souvenirs saved for his fox mask stored away in a scroll, he rose to his feet and decided to search for Jiraiya. He decided to take his time and not use his clones. There were still more sights to see. Besides, the town wasn't that big. Not much later, the blonde was walking down one of the still busy streets with his hands behind his head when a familiar voice reached his ears. He blinked. Huh, isn't that the old sage's voice? The blonde's eyes then narrowed. Sounds like someone's having a good time. Isn't he supposed to be looking for clues about Tsunade? He peeked into a nearby bar, and found Jiraiya sitting back at one of the stalls with a girl in each of his arms. Naruto stepped inside and walked up to the white-haired man, who grinned at him as he reached for a cup of sake. Well, look what the cat dragged in. How's it going? Enjoying yourself? I could ask you the same question. The blonde said, taking in the sight before him. Okay, he was kind of jealous of him for being between these two, but... So, how'd your search go? Huh, Siege. What's he talking about, Mr. Jiraiya? One of the girls asked. It's nothing to worry about. Do I look like someone who doesn't have all their ducks in a row? Jiraiya asked, laughing uproariously. He then held out a key for Naruto. I got us a room in an inn. It's the only one against the canyon wall back where we first got here, and you can't miss it. Just show them this key. I'll join you tonight, okay? Until then, have fun. I know I will. Naruto sighed and took the key. Yeah, whatever. Well, back to the festival, he guessed. The sky was starting to turn when Jiraiya finally joined him in their room, holding a plastic. The blonde was sitting on his futon, reading through a book on sealing jutsu with a few test drawings scattered around him. Hey, kid, good to know I don't have to go looking for you. Same here, Naruto said with a slight grumble. So, I take it we'll have to pick things up tomorrow. Jiraiya waved him off with a grin as he walked into the room and sat on his futon right next to Naruto's. Nah, I got what I needed. Tsunade was last headed northeast of here. I know a little place that's rotten with gambling dens, that's gotta be where she's headed. Naruto could only blink in shock, and the legendary ninja's grin widened. Know your quarry, kid. Tsunade's half as bad with sake as she is with gambling. Which is saying a lot. I knew if I mingled and asked around, I'd find out what I needed. So, he'd actually been working back there. Sort of. Jiraiya chuckled. We'll head out in the morning. And we'll spend the next few hours going over some more advanced seal formulas, but first. He pulled out a pair of popsicles. With a smile, he broke it in half and handed one to him. Tell me, how was your first time at a festival? Naruto snapped out of his stupor with a smile of his own and exuberantly regaled him with his exploits. Many laughs were shared until he told him about the lottery. Well, color me impressed. And a bit jealous, Jiraiya said. Naruto laughed. Until Jiraiya pointed his popsicle at him, looking serious. But listen here, kid, don't ever mention that to Tsunade. Naruto opened his mouth to ask why, then he remembered the legendary sucker thing, and his mouth snapped shut. However, that and all he'd learned about the woman did raise some questions. So, why'd she leave Konoha, anyway? Jiraiya grimaced, looking a little pained. He sighed. Not my story to tell, kid. I will say that she didn't wait long after the last Ninja World War ended. Make of that what you will. Naruto sucked in a breath, then looked down at the floor. Yeah, that painted a pretty clear picture. Jiraiya closed his eyes. I can't say how she might have changed over the years, but I hope she's in a better state than she was when she left, especially with what I have to ask her. Naruto looked up and blinked. You mean, there's more than just asking her to help out? Oh boy, is there, Jiraiya replied with a smirk. Naruto got the feeling that he was anticipating his reaction. The old man wanted her to be the next Hokage if something happened to him. Naruto didn't disappoint. What? You still in shock, kid? Jiraiya asked as he eyed Naruto. The pair were walking down a dusty trail towards their next stop. The revelation that Tsunade was supposed to be the next Hokage had completely thrown Naruto for a loop. It wasn't too surprising, really. It was his life's dream, even if he was only recently starting to really get what it meant. But that only made him more driven about this. He crossed his arms, shaking his head with his eyes closed. Sorry if I'm having trouble wrapping my head around how someone who hasn't been in the village since before I was born could be the next Hokage. He said, sarcasm and frustration practically dripping from every word. I get that she's been going through some stuff, but come on. Plus, we're trusting someone who gambled their whole clan's inheritance away with the most important job in the village. Jiraiya gave a suffering sigh. He then shrugged and said, yeah, I see your point. But trust me, she knows how to handle herself when she has responsibilities. Keep in mind this is how she is when she doesn't have any. Naruto grumbled, still not entirely happy about her replacing Old Man Hokage. He couldn't help but wonder if Konoha had changed since she was away. Had she ever checked up on her home? He couldn't imagine not at least keeping his ear to the ground if it was him, and he'd have come running if something like the invasion went down and he hadn't been there. Well, you better hope she accepts, Jiraiya replied in a tone that screamed, I know something you don't, and I can't wait to see your face. Naruto cracked open to see he was smirking at him. And why's that? Because the old man's next choice was Kakashi. Naruto gaped and came to a dead stop, and Jiraiya chuckled at him. The blonde shook himself out of his shock and then pointed at the sage. Wait, what about you? Jiraiya crossed his arms, tilted his head, and closed his eyes. Me. He asked me to take the seat, but I turned him down. Naruto's mind shut down. For a moment, he just gaped at the Sannin. Not a single thought ran through his head as he processed that. Then, what? What the hell, old man? He wanted to name you Hokage and you turned him down. What were you? Geez, calm down, brat, Jiraiya cut him off. I get that it's a big deal to you, but not everyone dreams of wearing that hat, you know. He closed his eyes. I know I never did. But, well, he had a point. Naruto searched for a response for a moment. Wouldn't it have been better for the village if you agreed? I mean, you're one of our strongest ninjas, aren't you? And we don't have a leader right now. Yeah, I am. And I've always felt that I could do more good for the village in the field. He shrugged, waving one hand. Think about it, kid. Let's say I did take him up on the offer. Then I'd be stuck in that tower most of the time. I can't go out and about gathering information or fighting Konoha's enemies before they become a problem. Sure, I could still handle my information network, but not as well if I can't personally go out and meet people. Jiraiya looked pointedly at the blonde and said, take this situation, for example. Part of why I didn't come back to Konoha to check up on you. It's because I found out Akatsuki was after the Biju years ago, and I was hoping to find out all I could about them or even nip this in the bud, partly because I knew they'd be coming for you. Naruto was startled at that and could only gape at him. You know, this wasn't the first time the old man tried to get me to take up his seat. The last time was after the Kyuubi attack. If I'd taken him up on the offer, then we may not have known about Akatsuki. Then there's other aspects of the job. Having to be someone everyone looks up to and aspires to be. I do plenty of that as the legendary Jiraiya of the Sannin. He said his name and title with a flourish. He then ticked off his next point with his fingers. Having the most important matters of diplomacy fall on your shoulders. Sure, other ninjas like myself handled it from time to time, but the big stuff when cages meet. Not my strong suit, and screwing up there can break an alliance or even cause a war. And above all, I happen to like my freedom. Like I said, this isn't the first time he asked me. I've had a long time to think of all the reasons why it's just not for me. Naruto took in Jiraiya's explanation and then looked down at the ground and thought. The Toad Sage made some good points. He hadn't really thought of what being a leader would involve. Well, the obvious things like choosing who was best for what job, managing the village and inspiring people, sure. But diplomacy, or the restrictions it would put on him. Kid, let me ask you something. Why do you want to be Hokage? Huh, Naruto looked up and blinked. Well, you know how people treated me because of. Well, Jiraiya nodded. The old man kept most people from really doing anything. But they made sure they knew I wasn't welcome. Most of them would ignore me. He then looked up confidently. So I decided I'd be Hokage, so they have no choice but to acknowledge me. Jiraiya was silent for a moment, then he said. If that's the case, forget it. What? Naruto then became living, balling his fist and glaring at the Sannin. What the hell, old man? You think I can't pull it off? Jiraiya shook his head. Not what I meant, kid. In fact, quite the opposite. That took the wind out of his sails. Jiraiya paused for a moment, then kneeled and put his hand on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto, I can see a lot of your parents in you. And even besides that, I can see the makings of someone great. Hell, you're already making a name for yourself, even if you didn't know it. Naruto blinked again, and Jiraiya smirked. Don't think your showdown with Gaara went unnoticed. You and your friends were the talk of the town. Naruto frowned. Then, Jiraiya interrupted him. But see, that's the thing. They don't offer the position to just anyone. You've got to be known to be one of the best just to be considered. Every ninja who became Hokage, and everyone who got the offer like me, were already renowned ninjas or heroes. He looked him in the eyes. The Hokage didn't get acknowledged by becoming Hokage, they became Hokage because they'd already been acknowledged. Naruto could only stare, speechless. He'd never thought of it that way. If all you want is acknowledgement, you'll already have it by the time you get the offer. Jiraiya stood. So think hard about why you want to be Hokage. Naruto was silent for a few moments before a question came to mind. Why did my dad want to be Hokage? Jiraiya chuckled fondly, cupping his chin and looking wistfully in the distance. Believe it or not, both of your parents wanted to be Hokage for reasons that weren't too different from yours when they were your age. Naruto's eyes shot wide as he looked up at the legendary ninja, who continued to look off into the distance. Into the past, the blonde realized. Kushina. No one knew her secret, but she always felt like an outsider, even though she had people who loved her. She wanted to be Hokage to get acceptance and recognition. As for your father, he wanted to be the best. Not known as the best. Kushina tried to butt heads with him a lot over it, but he always just let it slide off him. Even encouraged her to race to the position, threw her for a loop, I'll tell you. He chuckled. He closed his eyes. But by the time they'd grown up, Kushina found what I'd told you. She'd made a name for herself. Had friends, respect, and love. She had everything she'd wanted out of being Hokage and more, so she stopped chasing that dream. As for your father, he wanted to be Hokage because he dreamed that one day, all the villages would understand each other and put aside their differences, and we'd have the peace the first Hokage dreamed of when he built Konoha with his brother and Madara. For that to happen, someone had to inspire people to want the same and forge bonds with the leaders of other nations. He wanted to be that person. Jiraiya looked off into the distance again, his expression almost unreadable beyond a hint of sorrow. I think he could have done it. Had things been different. Naruto took all that in, his emotions and thoughts swirling around inside him as he looked to the ground, imagining his parents and his own dream. A minute passed before Jiraiya decided to break the silence. Come on, we've gotta get to the next town. We can't let the trail go cold. Naruto watched him walk by. He followed after a few seconds, lost in his thoughts. So, this is the place, huh? Naruto asked as they stood at the entrance to another city. It was bigger than the last one, and there was nothing really out of the ordinary about it. It was kind of like Konoha without the wall. Yep, hopefully, we can pick up the trail here, Jiraiya told him. He then walked on, motioning for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki to follow. Come on, I know a place. Just the sort of spot Tsunade would look for. As they walked along the village, Naruto's eyes were focused on the ground. The sage noticed this and said, still thinking about what we talked about. Naruto looked up before his eyes trailed back down. Yeah, not sure how I feel right now. Normally, the blonde would have been eagerly taking in the sights, but right now, his mind was on his parents and his dream. Take your time. You've still got a long way to go before you can fulfill your dreams either way, and a lot to learn. But that's what being a kid's all about. Just don't let it drag you down. This time won't last forever. He then grimaced. And you might need to grow up fast with Akatsuki on the loose. Though the same can be said for kids unlucky enough to grow up in wartime. Naruto cringed as he was reminded of the whole mess with Suna. There was so much up in the air right now. Jiraiya noticed his reaction and turned a raised brow at him. Something wrong. Nothing I didn't already know about. The blonde murmured. He looked up at the sage worriedly. Hey, Jiraiya-sensei, how do you see things playing out with Suna? The legendary ninja had seen a lot. Maybe he'd know something to put his mind at ease. Or give him reason to brace himself. He was surprised when Jiraiya smiled. Oh, is that what you're worried about? Hey, don't be. I get the feeling that'll work itself out before long. Naruto blinked. Wait, what? How do you figure that? Because I know my old teammate, Jiraiya said, his tone taking on a darker note. He looked back at the Jinchuriki with an unreadable expression. Kinda odd how the Cage never showed his face during their invasion. Things probably wouldn't have gone as well as they did for us if they had another ninja of that caliber on their side. Naruto was perplexed by that. Huh, what are you talking about? He was right there with the old man. Oh, right, you were gone by then. Yeah, that wasn't the Cage. That was Orochimaru in disguise. The Uzumaki made a noise of surprise at that. The real Cage was a no-show. Naruto frowned. He looked to the ground, puzzling it out in his head. Yeah, he was right. He couldn't see the old man not being there for something that big. So why? It took him several moments before his head shot up. Wait, you mean? Jiraiya nodded grimly. More often than not, when Orochimaru impersonates someone, he uses a specific jutsu. It's almost impossible to see through. But to use it, you have to kill the person you want to copy and steal their face. Literally. It's the same trick he used to sneak into the exams, I'm told. Naruto gaped at him. So back then, yikes. He'd never put much thought into how Orochimaru snuck into the Forest of Death. Jiraiya continued, put that together with how he didn't show up to support his ninja. And chances are the Cage's long gone. Old Snake Face was probably pulling Suna's strings for a while now. And when they realize that, if they haven't already, they're going to want to bury the hatchet with us ASAP so they can focus on recovery. And payback. I can't say what they'll do or what the relationship between our villages is going to look like in the future, but I'm sure they'll at least want to cease hostilities for the time being. Naruto took a moment to process that. He didn't need any more reminders that Orochimaru was one nasty piece of work. Still, that was one weight off his shoulders. He was glad war with Suna was off the table if the Toad Sage was right. And here we are, Jiraiya said, looking up. The local gamblers love to spend their downtime in this place. Naruto stopped and looked at the place. It looked like your average bar from the outside. He then turned back to the sage, who was making a give-me gesture at him. Okay, kid, I'm going to need you to hand over your wallet. Naruto blinked. Wah, huh. Naruto took a step back, his eyes wide white circles as he quickly pieced together why Jiraiya would want his wallet outside a bar where gamblers gathered. What the hell? What do you need that for? I don't have any cash with me, Jiraiya replied, looking somewhat sheepish as he rubbed the back of his head with his free hand. And these guys are hardcore gamblers. There's only one language they speak in. And how's that my problem? Jiraiya shrugged. Without their info, we'll have a much harder time finding Tsunade. But if you're okay with spending a few extra weeks searching the Land of Fire. Naruto sputtered for a moment. And what if you lose my money? I'll cut you a check, Jiraiya replied. Naruto grumbled, biting his lip and thinking. Finally, he groaned and pulled out his frog wallet, stuffed near to bursting. Fine, but this better be worth it. Jiraiya grinned. Oh, don't worry about that. And with that, he confidently strode in. Naruto haltingly followed, almost not wanting to see what might happen to his money. The blonde watched as Jiraiya showed a picture of a teenage Tsunade around until a man spoke up. The man, dressed in a kimono with a short beard that framed his mouth, grinned. I've seen her. That drew their attention. I got quite the payout not too long ago, thanks to the lady. Flashback. A slender, very curvy woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s threw open the door of the most illustrious gambling parlor in town. She wore a grass-green haori with the kanji for gamble on the back over a sleeveless, gray kimono-esque blouse, closed low to show off cleavage, and matching pants with black ninja sandals. Around her neck was a simple necklace with a small green crystal. Trailing behind her was a woman with straight black hair that went down to her shoulders in a bluish black with white trimmings. The black-haired woman looked worried, and it turned to near panic as the blonde slammed a briefcase full of Ryo at the table. Wait, isn't that? He wondered to himself. I want to turn all these into chips, the woman said. He grinned in anticipation, and all the other gamblers in the know mirrored his reaction. 10 minutes later. The woman stared down at the table, her eye twitching. She'd lost everything. Ha ha ha, yes, you are indeed the legendary sucker. Flashback ends. Naruto gave the man a stare overflowing with mixed disbelief and dismay that this was who was going to be the next Hokage. Jiraiya had a similar expression, shoulders slumped slightly. She lost big again, did she? Lovely. Sannin groaned. He then sighed and straightened himself up. So, do you have any idea where she went? Oh, I know. But how about we make this fun? The man held up a pair of dice. We play one round of Honcho. You win, I tell you, for free. I win, I'll take 3,000 Ryo for the information. A strangled sound left Naruto's throat, his eyes darting between the man and his sensei, who grinned confidently. Hey, I figured as much. 5 minutes later. Naruto looked dejectedly at his now nearly empty wallet. He then looked up as Jiraiya waved a sheet of paper in front of him. Here, the Sannin said, before raising a brow at Naruto's shocked expression. What, you think I was blowing smoke? Here's what I lost, plus a little extra. Naruto took the check. Sure enough, it was made out for 3,500 Ryo. The blonde sighed. At least he hadn't lost anything, but he looked back at his empty wallet. There goes all my spending cash for the whole trip. Well, at least we know where to go. Next stop, Tanzakugai. Jiraiya said. Yeah, Naruto grumbled, giving his wallet one last glance before putting the check in and shoving it in his pocket with a sigh. At least Jiraiya kept his word about paying him back. That night, they stopped in a small inn in the middle of the road. They'd be in Tanzakugai by noon tomorrow. Alright, kid, I hear you managed to learn the Shadow Clone Jutsu in one night. Pretty good. Let's see if that talent extends to other jutsu. Jiraiya said, sitting on the futon across from him with a grin. Tonight, I'll be teaching you an original jutsu from the legendary Jiraiya. Really? Awesome. What have you got for me, Jiraiya-sensei? Naruto could barely contain his excitement. Jiraiya chuckled, putting one hand on his chin while grinning as if reliving past glory days. It's a jutsu I developed when I was about your age. It's called Transparent Escape. It's one of a handful of techniques that render the user invisible to the naked eye. Invisible. Naruto trailed off before laughing as close to sinisterly as he could. Oh, he could think of a lot of uses for that. In and out of battle. The pranks he could pull. If he could paint the Hokage monument without that trick, what could he get up to with it? Jiraiya laughed uproariously. Oh yes, you wouldn't believe how valuable that ability is. Oh, how many times I was able to sneak into the women's baths. Sund was the only one who ever caught me. Naruto froze, blinked, and then gave the sage an unimpressed look. Wait, you made this technique. So you could peek into the women's baths. Jiraiya nodded proudly with his eyes closed. Yep, and it worked perfectly. Naruto wasn't sure he had room to say anything when he used to use the transformation jutsu the same way. Or tried to, anyway. He was glad he'd put that behind him. Mainly because he got the distinct feeling his parents would not have been too impressed with that. Not to mention it probably wasn't a good look for someone who wanted to be Hokage. Still. I know I used to do things like this, but I was never proud of it. Naruto thought disparagingly, giving the sage an irritated, half-lidded gaze. Well, he'd been proud of how his sexy jutsu, which would never see the light of day again, could knock people flat, but besides that. Although, if it was as effective as he said, maybe he could. Suddenly, a chill ran down his spine. An image seared itself into his mind, so clear he could almost see it. His father, arms crossed and looking at him in disappointment. And his mother. She had one tightly clenched fist raised with violence clear in the way it trembled. Her eyes were white pits of rage as her hair whipped around her head like 9 tails. Nope. He screwed his eyes shut, still somehow feeling like their gaze was upon him. A solemn promise to himself to make his parents proud banished the heart-wrenching, stopping image. Well, it was still a really useful jutsu. Jiraiya didn't notice annoyed, then thoughtful, then terrified looks that flashed across the blonde's face with his eyes closed. Finally, Naruto settled back on his unimpressed look and said, seriously. So, you were a little pervert, huh? Oh, I was never a little pervert. I was a big one. Jiraiya replied eagerly. He might have lost a bit of respect for him just now if he didn't know he'd earned his reputation. Naruto's eye twitched. Got it, pervy sage. Jiraiya looked affronted. Huh, what did you call me? Well, if you're that proud about it. Hey, I may wear it on my sleeve, but that title isn't the least bit respectful. I am the gallant Jiraiya, you know. Naruto crossed his arms, his expression not changing. I call him like I see him. Jiraiya grumbled, giving the blonde a dirty look. You're lucky you're my student and your father's son, so I'll let this slide. Yeah, sure, Naruto replied before silence fell. The blonde watched as Jiraiya began to pull scrolls out of his pouch, planning on what they'd work on, leaving the Kyuubi Jinchuriki with his thoughts. Aside from what just happened, the Sannin had been a great teacher and had done right by him since he showed up. He bet he hadn't taught many other people his technique. He got that was a big deal. And it made Naruto feel a bit bad that he hadn't told Jiraiya something big. Hey, Jiraiya-sensei, he said, fully serious. That might be the last time he called him that before he settled on pervy sage. Jiraiya looked up and immediately got that this was something heavy. Got something to tell me, kid? Yeah, I probably should have said something sooner. I mean, I told Kakashi-sensei, but... After a moment, he told Jiraiya about what exactly happened the first time he encountered the Kyuubi and what he'd said during the battle with Shukaku. The Sannin was mostly silent throughout the explanation, asking questions once in a while, but for the most part, he took it all in, his expression hard as stone as he thought through the implications. Afterwards, Jiraiya was silent, looking at the floor in thought. After a moment, he said, okay, first off, I wish you'd told me this sooner, but I get it. I wasn't there when I should have been, so it took time for you to really open up to me. I'm glad you could tell me now, at least. So, what do you think? What does the Kyuubi want? The blonde asked. That had been weighing on his mind for a long time. Haven't a clue. I can say this much, from what little Kushina told me, he was never even remotely this cooperative with her. What are the Biju anyway? Naruto asked. No one really knows, Jiraiya answered. They're known as living calamities, demons that have plagued mankind for eons. If anyone ever knew, that knowledge was lost a long time ago thanks to the warring clans era. That's all? Naruto asked. That's the best answer anyone could give. I can say this, the Biju aren't like any other demons I know of besides the havoc they wreak. Demonic chakra is different from theirs, and if you kill a demon, it stays dead. Maybe there's something special among them. Or maybe there's something else altogether. Pretty sure only the Biju themselves could give any more details, and they aren't talking. There was a pause before Jiraiya continued. Normally, I'd say don't listen to anything it said, but... You think I should, but be careful, Naruto gathered and said slowly. Jiraiya nodded. Don't trust it, he warned. Don't ever drop your guard with it, but yeah. After another moment, he said, you're probably wondering why, right? Getting an affirmative, he continued with his eyes closed. Well, my reasons go back to that fateful night. Naruto stiffened. He didn't need any further hints as to what night the Sannin was talking about. There are a lot of things about it that don't add up, Jiraiya said, then he gave the genin an appraising eye. Tell me something, kid. Put yourself in your father's shoes. Your wife's the Jinchuriki, and she's about to give birth. You know what that'll do to the seal. What do you do? Naruto was surprised to be put on the spot like that. His immediate answer was that he'd be there to make sure that didn't happen, but clearly, the sage was looking for more than that. Not to mention that he knew how bad it could go if things went wrong. Well, I'd be there to fix it, of course. And I'd probably put a barrier around or do it outside the village just in case. He trailed off, his eyes widening. Wait a minute, if he could think of that, then. Jiraiya looked pleased. Very good. Now, you're probably wondering why they didn't do something along those lines when you were born. Naruto nodded. That's the thing, they did. Naruto was caught short by that. What? Yeah, when it was time for you to come into the world, Kushina was taken to a site outside the village. So far, you couldn't even see it in the distance. Naruto stared, at a loss for words, as he tried to puzzle through the implications. We can't say we know everything the Biju are capable of, but one thing I can say for sure, they do not have any abilities related to time-space. Even if everything went wrong, it should have been impossible for the Kyuubi to appear in the heart of the village, and yet. He trailed off. After letting that hang in the air for a moment, he continued. And that's not all. It should come as no surprise that I came back home after the attack, got all the details that I could, and here's something else that struck me as odd. Minato showed up to defend the village not long after the attack began, just as expected. He used a barrier to protect Konoha from one of the Kyuubi's attacks. Then he disappeared. He didn't show up again until after the Kyuubi had been forced out of the village by the third and R ninja. Then he ended it. I can tell you, with his Hiraishin, it wouldn't have taken him too long to get you and your mother to safety so that we can count that out, so where was he? He gave Naruto a few seconds to absorb that information. So, we've got 3 questions, the sage summarized, holding up 3 fingers. How'd it happen? How did the Kyuubi appear in the heart of Konoha? And where was your father for most of the attack? But there's one more thing. Naruto braced himself. Jiraiya's last words were gravely weighted, and Naruto felt this last bombshell would be the biggest. What is it? Most didn't think much of this, for obvious reasons. But some of the people I asked said the Kyuubi appeared from a giant cloud of smoke. Naruto let out a strangled sound and gaped, staring as he processed that. That sounded like. Not so well-known fact, but a summoning contact for the Kyuubi does exist. Madara forced him to make it when he had control of him. Jiraiya informed him, seemingly offhandedly, and Naruto reeled back at the implications. I can't help but wonder. Is this new behavior its latest ploy for freedom? Or, does it have something to do with whatever happened that night? As if that wasn't enough to send a chill down Naruto's spine by itself, he heard the Kyuubi chuckle in the back of his mind. So don't trust it, but pay attention to every word. Because he's probably the only one left who knows exactly what went down all those years ago. And if it has something to do with his change in behavior. Well, I've already put enough on you, I think, but let's say that there might be something worse on the horizon. Naruto gulped at the thought. After a moment, he nodded, his brow furrowed deeply. Got it. I'll be careful. It was early the next day that the two Konoha ninjas arrived in Tanzakugai. Beneath the clear skies, they resumed their search. However, they had stalled for a moment. A few eyes were drawn their way as Naruto's cheers echoed through the gambling den they found themselves in on their search for Tsunade. Jiraiya could only stare, his jaw hanging wide in disbelief. Again. Naruto paid him no mind as he held up his once more full to bursting wallet. He grinned as he took in the sight of the overstuffed froggy pouch. Sure, he still had that check in his pocket, but that was nothing compared to the feeling of cold, hard cash in your hand. Besides, it always felt good to be a winner. The Sannin buried one hand in his hair as he shook his head. You won off a 1 coin. Sheesh, you've got the opposite of Tsunade's luck. He put one hand on his hip, smirking at the blonde. Remind me to take you to a casino when you're older. It'll probably be an enriching experience. Hey, shouldn't you be talking me out of vices, pervy sage? Naruto asked, his tone laced with good-natured sarcasm. Jiraiya chuckled. Hey, everything in moderation, kid. It's not a problem as long as you know when to stop. Unlike a certain someone we're looking for. He said that last part with a grumble. Yeah, did she really lose the whole Senju clan fortune? Naruto asked, putting away his wallet and looking a bit puzzled. He still couldn't get over that. The idea just seemed absurd, if what Sasuke had meant anything. Jiraiya sighed and buried a hand in his white hair as they began to make for the exit. Well, it's not entirely her fault. Naruto gave the man a dry look. How do you figure that? Jiraiya gave a short laugh. Fun little tidbit, did you know the first Hokage was a doting grandfather? The sage asked, and Naruto raised a brow, wondering where he was going with that. He loved to spend time with her and spoil her rotten when she was a kid, and she told me a neat little detail once. See, he liked to shower her with cash, and he also loved playing with her. I guess he also wanted her to feel like she earned what he gave her, so he mixed all three and... Naruto let out a strangled sound and looked up at Jiraiya with disbelief and disappointment as he got where the man was going. Don't tell me. The legendary ninja nodded sagely. Yep, he used to gamble with her over cards and other stuff and let her win and take all his money every time. Keep in mind this started when she was practically a toddler, so big surprise she grew up to be an addict. He then let out a short series of barking laughs. Oh, you should have heard the commotion when his wife and son found out. I fell out laughing when Tsunade told us this story, and we realized that's what all the yelling had been about. Hell, even Orochimaru. That seemed to dampen his mood. He fell silent after that. Naruto looked at him sympathetically as he sighed and stared into nothing. So, the first Hokage turned his granddaughter into a gambling addict, huh? Naruto asked. He mostly wanted to get the Sannin's mind off his old teammate. It had to be painful to remember something like that. Jiraiya snorted. The first was every bit the great man the history books paint him as, but everyone has their flaws. He chuckled. Trust me, I've got tons of stories like that. Naruto smiled. But then his smile dropped. The third had probably had a lot of stories like that, too. Had anyone heard them all? He was still adjusting to the idea that he wouldn't be there to greet them the next time they came back from a mission. The blonde shook his head. This wasn't the time to think about that, not when he'd just tried to pull Jiraiya out of the same. Besides, if what they'd been told was right, they should be closing in on Tsunade. And on top of that, you'll have to tell me some more later. Right now, I'm dying to see this castle. That was their next stop, the castle that lay at the center of the town. Jiraiya wanted to use that as a vantage point. Naruto was kind of curious to see it, not to mention the view. Naruto ran outside and heard the sage chuckle behind him. The blonde looked up and... Wait, where was the castle? The Kyuubi Jinchuriki ran to the nearby castle town wall and leapt to the top, landing with a clack on the green eaves of the roof. And stopped. After a moment of disbelief, he went on alert. Pervy sage, we've got trouble. Jiraiya joined him a second later and frowned ahead. The castle had been reduced to rubble. It must have been before they even set foot in town. What the hell happened? Hey! Jiraiya called out to someone running away in a panic. If he saw what happened and was already this far away, it must have been some time ago. What happened over there? What are you doing just standing up there? We've all gotta get out of here. The panicked civilian said, not stopping. A giant snake just tore down the castle. A giant snake. Here. Naruto and Jiraiya shared a look, nodded as one, and then took off towards the castle ruins. The blonde clicked his tongue when they arrived at the courtyard walls. A section of them had been torn down, giving a clear view of the ruins beyond. The area was silent, with no sign of anyone. Damn, I don't see anything. He then turned to the Sannin, who was looking at the destruction with a critical eye. It looks like everyone hightailed it. Any witnesses are probably in the wind, Jiraiya commented, his hand on his chin. It's gotta be Orochimaru, right? Or someone who works for him. But, what was he doing here? Naruto asked. Couldn't say, but it can't be good, Jiraiya replied, shaking his head. The sage then jumped up to the highest standing tower along the courtyard wall. He looked around, then frowned. Hey, check this out. He pointed before leaping down. Naruto followed him, and they arrived at another ruined wall. The blonde frowned. Everything else here seemed perfectly fine, and they were a bit away from the castle. The snake didn't do this. Nope, but there aren't any other signs of battle. Strange, Jiraiya mused, rubbing his chin. Anyway, we aren't going to find anything standing around here, and it looks like any witnesses are long gone. Come on, let's see if we can find any witnesses. Naruto nodded, then looked at the castle and sighed. According to the sage, he was glad it was just a tourist attraction nowadays. A lot of people would have been hurt here. Still, it was a shame. He'd been looking forward to seeing it. Well, nothing more to do here. He followed after Jiraiya, wondering what Orochimaru was up to now. In the end, they didn't learn anything they didn't already know. The castle suddenly erupted, and a giant snake emerged from it before disappearing in a flash of smoke. Jiraiya thought it sounded like Orochimaru wanted to make an entrance, but there was no telling why. The next day, they got up bright and early and resumed their search. After hitting half a dozen bars, they got the news. You said you saw her a few hours ago. Jiraiya asked. Yep, about a decade older than this picture, but the face was unmistakable, the man said, nursing his drink. Came here and ordered a few cups of sake. She was real quiet, and so was that brunette with her. Think she had something on her mind. I wonder, does it have something to do with Orochimaru? Jiraiya mused, rubbing his chin. Which way was she headed? Naruto asked. Can't say, but she was making for where the castle used to be, he replied. So, she's not leaving town, then. Jiraiya mused before taking out his checkbook and a pen. Thanks for the info, he quickly made out a check and gave it to the man. Next few are on me. Ah, thank you kindly, sir, the man said as they walked away, Jiraiya waving over his shoulder. His levity faded once they left, though. Yeah, old Snake Face had something to say to her, I'm sure of it. Otherwise, she would have left town by now. What do you think he wanted? I can't say. Tsunade wouldn't betray us, but he might have given her something to think about. Well, whatever. We can ask her when we find her, Naruto said, grinning as he raised a fist. Leave this one to me, pervy sage. He then leapt to the top of the bar. The Sannin followed, arriving just in time for Naruto to make a cross-shaped hand seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 24 copies of Naruto burst into existence. Then, they all made their hand seals, and the roof was covered in smoke. When it cleared, a flock of birds scattered into the sky. Oh, I see. Pretty clever there, kid, Jiraiya said as he shielded his eyes from the sun and watched the birds fly. Naruto grinned at the praise, hands behind his head. Now, they just had to wait. And it wasn't long before one of the blonde's clones had something to share. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki's head jerked up as he and Jiraiya walked towards another bar, memories of a literal bird's eye view flooding his mind. The Sannin instantly noticed and came to a stop. Find her? Jiraiya asked. Naruto shook his head, looking past a nearby wall at what his clone had seen. I don't know, but there's something big going on. There's a crowd of people gawking at a casino. Well, there are two places Tsunade would hit up if she wanted to get her mind off something, and I shouldn't have to tell you what they are at this point. Okay, let's check it out. They made a beeline to what his clone had seen, taking to the rooftops and leaping across buildings and walls until they came down out of sight beside one of the largest gambling halls in the town. It was a large 3-story building with white walls and green tiles on its roof, looking almost like a small castle. They stepped inside, and it didn't take more than a second to see a huge gathering of people about halfway across the building. It looked like even most of the gamblers had dropped everything and gone to see what was happening. The crowd completely obscured whatever was in the area, so Naruto had no idea what they were gawking at. Then, he heard a woman's voice positively cackle with glee. Finally. After all the shit I've had to put up with, everything's finally coming around. That voice. Jiraiya said. Then he paled, his eyes widening. Oh no, if I know her. I've got to. He ran forward but only made it 3 steps before. One more. All or nothing on black. Jiraiya stopped and groaningly face-palmed while Naruto gaped. Another woman's voice cried shrilly while the crowd cheered her on, some cupping their mouths and pumping their fists. You'd think she'd learn. This is just Lady Luck jerking her chain again. Jiraiya groaned, shaking his head. He then sighed, crossed his arms, and hung his head down. Everyone fell silent, and Naruto could hear the sound of a ball rolling. Was she trying to roulette table? And from the sound of it, she'd won big up until now. But from what he'd heard of her. Oh boy. 3, 2, 1. Jiraiya counted down. No. The wail echoed through the building as the crowd murmured in disappointment. It didn't take long for them to start scattering, abandoning her now that the spectacle had ended in a humiliating loss, revealing a set of 4 roulette tables. It looked like even the other dealers had stepped up to watch since their customers had, but now it was all back to business as usual. And there, sitting at the far table with her head down, hands buried in her hair, was a woman who had to be Tsunade. At her side was a brunette dressed in a black kimono, who had dropped down to her knees, head hung low as a cloud of dismay hung over her. She clutched something tightly to her chest as the blonde banged her fist against the table. Whoa, that was a huge stack of coins the teller was taking away. There had to be a fortune there. Holy hell, did she win all of that, to lose it at the end? Typical Tsunade, Jiraiya said, shaking his head in exasperation. Fun fact. Whenever she hits a winning streak, it's either a bad omen, or it'll end like this. He chuckled. Funny enough, she kinda knows that, and yet this happens anyway, he said with a gesture towards her. Naruto's eye twitched. Seriously. He looked from one Sannin to the other, then face-palmed, peeking at the first Hokage's granddaughter through his fingers. I hope I never understand the mind of an addict. For your sake, I hope so too. Now, come on, let's go and say hi. And with that, Jiraiya began to walk towards the other Sannin. It probably said something that, even in her current state, she heard them approach. She jerked her head and looked at them out of the corner of her eye as they neared. She tensed but immediately relaxed when she saw the white-haired man, raising her head as her eyes widened. Jiraiya, she asked in disbelief, blinking as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Hey, you look like you could use a pick-me-up and a hot meal, Tsunade. On me, Jiraiya said smoothly, pointing at his chest with this thumb. Not too long after, Jiraiya took them to a nearby yakiniku grill. The two pairs sat across from each other as meat sizzled on the grill, but despite the appetizing sound and smell, none looked at the food. Naruto looked from the third Sannin he'd met to the brunette at her side. Must be her apprentice or something. So, probably another medical ninja. The woman held a pig. It looked ordinary, aside from the red jacket and pearl necklace that it wore. A ninja pig, is that a thing? Or maybe they just dressed it up. You certainly know when to show up, Tsunade spoke quietly, staring into her cup, idly swishing its contents. Her gaze was miles away, and Naruto couldn't help but wonder what was on her mind. After all these years trying to put the past behind me, it all came back to the surface in just 2 short days. Let me guess, I'm not the only blast from the past you've seen, Jiraiya said seriously, his arms crossed. Tsunade's brown eyes rose to look at him. He tilted his head to the side. I saw signs of your little get-together. What did old Snake Face want? Tsunade paused for a moment before looking back to her cup. Just to say hi, and keep me updated on his latest escapades. So you know about the old man? Naruto asked, speaking up for the first time. Tsunade's gaze turned to him. She squinted for a moment, and then her brows rose for a moment before she looked away. Yeah, he told me about it. When she said that, for a moment, he couldn't help but remember the last time he'd seen the third. His hackles were raised, and he shot to his feet. And you just let him. Naruto. Jiraiya cut him off. He turned to see the Sannin look hard at him. The blonde growled but sat down. He's certainly a far cry from your last student, Tsunade commented. The fourth Hokage was a tough act to follow, but the kid's actually pretty good, Jiraiya shrugged, smiling fondly as he put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. He wears his heart on his sleeve, though. Even more so than most of the village, Sensei was a grandfather to him, so. The first time he lost someone he knew, too. The brunette looked at him with sympathy while Tsunade's glazed eyes lingered on him for a moment before they closed. I see, she said, then looked back at Jiraiya. So, to what do I owe this visit? Cutting right to the chase, huh? Jiraiya asked before he got serious again. Tsunade, I come with a request from the Council of Konoha and the last wish of the third Hokage. I'm here to ask you to become the fifth Hokage of Konoha. Both of the women seemed shocked by that. Not that he blamed them when Tsunade hadn't even been in the village for so long. You came all this way to ask me that. I can't think of anyone more qualified. Besides, the old man had faith in you. Jiraiya replied. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. I hope you don't think guilt-tripping me will get anywhere. I'm not. I'm just telling you how it is, Jiraiya replied. I know better than most that wouldn't work on you. And I suppose he didn't ask you first, she replied dryly. Only because I was the one on hand, Jiraiya admitted. We all know that you're better suited to that kind of responsibility. There was a pause. Tsunade closed her eyes, resting her head on one hand, and then said clearly, I refuse. I figured you'd say that. Just like all those times I tried to ask you out, Jiraiya replied with a smirk. Tsunade just scoffed in response. But I know you. You're not just going to walk away. Not when you know Konoha needs you. Tsunade closed her eyes. What Konoha needs right now is Sensei. But he's not here anymore. Why? Because he gave his life protecting the village, just like all the grandfather, his brother, and the fourth. She looked directly into Jiraiya's eyes, whose gaze had turned hard. Life's not like chips, you know. You can't just gamble it away so freely. To become Hokage means sacrificing everything. Your freedom, your dreams, and in the end, you'll probably die young. Sensei may have lived to a ripe old age. But he devoted so much to the village that he could never balance his position and his family. I can't fathom why anyone would want such a job. Throughout Tsunade's tirade, Naruto had grown increasingly tense. At this point, he was almost seeing red, his nails digging into his fingers so hard they nearly drew blood. Tsunade, you've changed over the years, Jiraiya said, a slight disappointment in his tone. The years have taught me a great deal. There's no way I'd ever take that position. It's a sucker's bet. That's it. Naruto slammed his fist on the table, causing all the food to jump. He didn't care who she was. He was not about to sit here and let her badmouth both the third and his father. Where the hell do you get off talking about the Hokage like that? Naruto snarled. You're naive, brat, Tsunade replied, unfazed. In the end, 3 of the Hokage died young, defending the village. All their hopes and dreams went up in smoke. And what if giving their all for the village was their dream? Naruto shot back, drawing Tsunade's attention. You don't think they knew what they were getting into when they took the hat? Then they got what they wanted in the end, I suppose. She replied. The Sannin leaned forward, resting her arm on the table. Why exactly does it matter to you? Naruto took a deep breath. Because. He thought back to what had been going through his mind the past few days. What he'd learned about his father. What his dream had been. His dreams had been naive, childish, and built upon admiration for people that he was only now realizing that he hadn't understood. Who'd seen and known things he could hardly imagine, with struggles and burdens much greater than he'd known. He was still trying to figure things out. Was the respect and admiration really what he wanted most from being Hokage? If so, would he reach the same conclusion as his mother? Could he do more for the village in the field, like Jiraiya? He wasn't sure, but what he did know was that he wanted to do all he could for his village. That invasion had been only a taste of war, and it had been more than enough for him. He never wanted to see that or what happened to Suna again. Because being Hokage's been my dream for the longest time. Because I want to do all that I can for our village, just like they did. He rose to his feet, teeth grit, and slammed one open palm on the table. And because I'm not going to sit here while you talk shit about my father. Tsunade jerked back, her eyes wide. Then she settled down. So, you know. She looked at Jiraiya. Sarutobi-sensei wouldn't have approved. Huh? Jiraiya barked out a laugh. Joke's on you, the old man's the one who told him. She was visibly shocked by that. The white-haired man became a bit more serious. A mission went bad. He woke up something he got from his mom, which left him with a lot of questions. And once he knew she was. Tsunade didn't respond for a moment before her gaze returned to Naruto. He met her eyes with a glare, daring her to say anything. All that you can, huh? Do you think you can back that up? Damn right, I will. Naruto answered. Okay, let's see about that. 6 days. You have 6 days to impress me. Pull it off, and I'll give you one of my last treasures. The brunette looked shocked beside her. Naruto grinned. Deal. Don't even care what'll happen if I win. Tsunade asked. Why should I? I don't plan on losing. HMPH, was Tsunade's response as she rose to her feet. Shizune, come on. Now, hold on, Jiraiya stopped her, leaning back with a smirk. How about you and me share a drink? It's been a long time, we've got a lot of catching up to do. I hope this isn't your attempt to ask me on a date. Tsunade replied, eyes narrowed. What, can't a guy just want to reminisce with his old teammate? Come on, it's been decades, he then grumbled under his breath. Besides, why would I want to date someone in their 50s? Tsunade's eye twitched as Naruto gave the middle-aged man an unimpressed look. What was that? Nothing, Jiraiya replied. It was a hasty response, but he had a playful look in his eye. Naruto got the feeling he said that to rile her up. Fine, your treat, Tsunade finally answered. Jiraiya rose to his feet. Naruto, you run along. Maybe get to know Shizune here. But I suggest you buckle down, after that. You've got one steep hill to climb. It's really saying something, but you've gotten a lot more cynical since we've last seen each other, Jiraiya said as he glanced at his old teammate, holding a cup of sake. Tsunade said nothing and watched her give a long gaze to her drink. Her expression was difficult to read, but even so, Jiraiya could see her past passing before her eyes. Yeah, well, that's life, isn't it? She replied, taking a shot. It chews you up and spits you out cynical or swallows you up hopeful. Jiraiya frowned. He never remembered his old teammate being such a surly drunk. Now, he wished he hadn't just kept tabs on her but in contact as well. Without anyone to talk about what happened, bitterness and guilt had had decades to coalesce around her, and it wouldn't be easy to break her out of it. He decided on a different tactic. You know, until recently, the kid's life's mission was to become Hokage, Jiraiya said with a smirk as he thought back on the conversation he'd had with him the other day. Oh, he wise up. Jiraiya shrugged. Who knows? Maybe he'll change his dream to something else, or maybe he'll chase that dream twice as hard. Who can say? He took a shot of his sake. But you want to know why he wanted to be Hokage. Jiraiya watched Tsunade start to side-eye him. He told me he wanted to be acknowledged by everyone, that being Hokage would force everyone to notice him. Tsunade scoffed, her eye returning to her drink. There's easier ways for a brat to get attention. Yeah, well, not every brat gets the attention they deserve, Jiraiya said, a hint of regret seeping into his voice. Anyways, I explained to him more about what it would really mean to be Hokage, and I think when he's done thinking it over, his dream, whatever it is, will be twice as strong. Tsunade huffed. Dreams are for kids, Jiraiya, and sooner or later, we all wake up. Hey, Konoha was once just a dream to your granddad Tsunade, and now it's here. I'd say that's a hell of an improvement on what we had before, right? Jiraiya said with a chuckle. That's how it works. We do all we can and leave the rest to those who come after us. Moving forward a little bit at a time. Maybe we have setbacks, maybe it'll all fall apart in the end, but we won't get anywhere if no one chases these dreams, right? Are you quoting your first book at me? Tsunade asked, side-eyeing him again, though there wasn't any bite to her tone. Jiraiya had a blush, a combination of alcohol and embarrassment. I mean, yeah, a little. Wasn't that a total flop? Hey, I'll have you know it has a very loyal following. Even if sales weren't enough to cover the printing. Jiraiya admitted only to himself. Besides, everything I've written since has been one smash hit after another. He laughed as she scoffed. He had no doubt she had no appreciation for his works after The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Ninja. Besides, my students loved it. Jiraiya hoped Naruto liked it as much as his father did. After all, he planned to give him an autographed copy for his next birthday. Well, someone had to, Tsunade replied, taking another shot. Like I said, Jiraiya, dreams are for kids. And my dreams died in my arms long ago. Jiraiya sighed at that. Okay, let's change the subject then. He quickly took another shot of his sake. What did Orochimaru want? He knew her well enough to figure that out. But he wasn't so sure about what she intended to do when she met him. So, any idea how exactly you'll win this bet, Naruto? Jiraiya asked him, smirking as he leaned against a tree while he watched the blonde and his clones train. You didn't even ask how she wants you to impress her. I'll figure something out, Naruto replied confidently. Whatever she asks me, I'm sure I can handle it. Hey, well, we'll see about that, won't we? Jiraiya replied with a chuckle. Anyway, there's something I've been meaning to work on with you, and now's as good a time as any to get on it. Really, what? Naruto asked, looking back at his sensei. Half of his clones were still practicing the transparency escape jutsu, every once in a while peeking at the scroll on it that Jiraiya wrote up for him. Tell me, what all do you know about those chains of yours? Jiraiya asked, walking over and sitting down in front of him. Naruto blinked. Then he looked excited. The old man hadn't said much, and he'd mostly asked him about stories about his parents, not their techniques. He hadn't had enough time to teach him things like that anyway. And Kakashi-sensei knew little at all. He'd helped him learn to use them, but that was about all he could do. But Jiraiya was a sensei when his mom was a genin, and he was his dad's sensei. He could actually know something about them. Naruto sat down in front of him. Not much. Kakashi-sensei told me that once you master them, they can restrain chakra, even the Kyubis. That's about it. Hey, figured as much, Jiraiya said with a smirk. Alright, listen up. There's a lot more to those chains than that. And while I obviously don't know how to do any of it myself, between the two of us, we should be able to figure out some of the things your mother had in her arsenal. The blonde grinned widely, two fists raised in excitement. He was always happy to learn more about his parents. Stories, techniques, anything. What have you got for me? Two things come to mind, Jiraiya said, raising two fingers. First, you can form a near impenetrable barrier between the chains. Second, they can transform into sealing formulas. I'm pretty sure studying other forms of barrier jutsu should help you figure out the first one. For the sealing jutsu, well, that's going to take some work. Naruto's eyes widened in amazement. He leaned forward, slamming a palm on the ground. Well then, let's get started, pervy sage. Days passed. Naruto spent most of his time outside the city, training with the weighted seal Sakura bought him and Sasuke so many months ago as his clones worked on their jutsu and chakra control. He didn't leave it all to his clones, though. He joined in whenever he needed a break from physical training. Besides, he would admit that it felt a little cheap doing it this way. That wasn't going to stop him, of course. Outside of that, he would explore the town. Even with the castle gone, this place still had a few old historic shrines that were interesting to see. And there were plenty of restaurants to try, even if none could hold a candle to Ichiraku's. Jiraiya was out catching up with Tsunade half the time, but he supervised when he had time. He didn't have the best first impression of Tsunade, but he kind of got it. From what Jiraiya had told him, she must have lost a lot. He could see how the years could make her bitter. Right now, though, he and a few clones around him were reading scrolls Jiraiya left him on barrier jutsu. The blonde let out a sigh as he sat back, waiting. A moment later, several of his clones dispersed. He put a hand to his head as all their memories flooded his mind. He figured the best way to spend the time waiting for it all to settle in his memory was some physical training. He rose to his feet and made a hand sign to adjust his weights but stopped as he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to see Tsunade's apprentice. "Oh, it's you," Naruto said. His eyes wandered up as he racked his memory before a name came to him. "Shizune, right," she nodded. The brunette seemed a bit troubled. "What are you doing here?" "I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to talk with you about Lady Tsunade and this wager she made," she said, gaze downcast. Naruto blinked. He got the feeling there was something heavy on her mind. Naruto rose to his feet and stretched. "Well, I'm all ears. First, I don't want you to get the wrong idea about her. I know she said some harsh things back there, but," Shizune started. "Yeah, I get it," Naruto interrupted her, and she looked surprised. "The pervy sage told me. He didn't exactly give me the details, but he said enough. I know she lost a lot. But she's the one who decided to walk away from everyone who was still there for her. I'm sure Jiraiya would have come running if she'd asked, not to mention the old man." He met her gaze with a glare and said, "And there's not a snowball's chance in hell let her talk about my dad, and the Hokage like that." Shizune hung her head for a second before she met his eyes again. "I understand. I do. But please, you have to back out of the deal." "That's not happening. I never back down from a challenge, no matter what," Naruto replied, determination written on his features as he grasped his forehead protector. "You don't understand. There's only one treasure Tsunade has left, and it's cursed." That drew Naruto up short. And then she told him her teacher's story. The treasure she'd spoken of was a necklace that had belonged to the first Hokage. Twice, she'd given it to the men she'd loved most. Her little brother and her lover. Both had dreamed of becoming Hokage. And both of them had died. It was in the memory of her brother Nawaki that she'd revised how medical ninja functioned, and she'd saved countless lives by doing it. But in the end, her lover, Shizune's uncle, had died in battle as she desperately tried to heal him. With no family left, Tsunade decided to leave the life of a ninja behind, to lose herself in her vices, and to forget. Naruto closed his eyes. He knew she'd had it rough, but for the one you love to die in your arms. His hand clenched. He turned, summoning more shadow clones. "What are you doing?" Shizune asked behind him. "What else? I'm getting back to training. I've got a challenge to win," he said, face firm with resolve. "Besides, I want to show Tsunade." "What?" Shizune asked in bewilderment. "It is worth it to chase your dreams. To believe in something." Naruto turned back to her for a second, resolve not wavering for a moment. "You shouldn't just try to push the world away. I know this won't do it, but you gotta start somewhere, right?" Shizune stared at him in shock for a second, then she raised her hands to her chest, watching him with sadness and hope. "You." Naruto let out a quiet grumble as he began to stir. The first thing he noticed as awareness slowly returned to him was the warmth on his skin. Then, the cold beneath him, soft bristles digging into his skin and the back of his head. It took him a moment to recognize the warmth for what it was the light of the sun. His eyes clenched shut, then slowly opened. The sight that greeted him was of the clear blue sky, and he realized that he had been lying on the ground. He turned slightly and saw that the sun had hovered above the horizon. The blonde rose and took in his surroundings, realizing he was still at his training ground. The area was littered with spots where his chains had ripped through the earth and torn stones apart. "Damn it, I overdid it." Slowly, he got to his feet. He let out a yawn as he stretched, feeling his bones pop. "I hope they didn't worry about me." Today was the day. It had been a week since they made their wager. Whatever Tsunade had in mind for him, it was time to rise to the challenge. Sanin or not, he was ready to knock her socks off. Nodding to himself, he adjusted his forehead protector. "All right, time to get moving." He took off running, ready for whatever trial lay ahead. It didn't take long before he had returned to their hotel. Jumping before the building from the roof above, he ran up the stairs and knocked on the door to the boy's room. "Hey, pervy sage, you in there?" No response. Naruto blinked in confusion before opening the door. The room was empty. There was no sign that the legendary ninja had returned to his room last night, either. Huh, what the hell? The Kyuubi Jinchuriki wondered aloud. The Sannin wouldn't have stayed out tonight, would he? He had to know what today was. He wondered where the sage could be before he looked at the girl's room next door. He ran over and knocked on their door. No response. Now Naruto frowned, a bit on edge. Where could they all have gone this early? And today, no less. Had something happened while he was away? Did Orochimaru do something? It could be nothing, but he couldn't help but feel a bit concerned, and that feeling only got stronger when he checked and found the door was unlocked. He threw it open, tension rising in him, and found someone on the floor. Shizune. He ran over to her and kneeled at her side. He quickly placed a hand on her shoulder. Warm, she was just unconscious. He gently shook her shoulder as he tried to rouse her. "Shizune, are you all right?" It was at that point that she began to stir. With a groan, her eyes slowly opened, black eyes taking in her surroundings before focusing on the blonde. "Naruto, you're okay," she began, starting to sit up before jerking in pain and clutching her stomach. "Of course I am," Naruto said, putting a fist to his chest. "I just overdid it a bit training last night." "Ah, I see. So that's what happened," Shizune replied, her eye clenched shut as she brought a hand to her stomach, glowing with green chakra. That had to be medical jutsu. It was Naruto's first time seeing it, but this wasn't the time to gawk. But that's not important. What happened here? Lady Tsunade. She sat up, healed enough that her injury didn't seem to bother her that much. The medical ninja looked at him urgently. "I think she's gone to see Orochimaru." "What?" Naruto exclaimed. "He offered to bring her brother and my uncle if she healed the injuries the third inflicted on him," she explained. She was supposed to come to him with her answer today. "You can't be serious. She couldn't deal with that." Naruto trailed off, teeth grit and fists clenched. But would she? How hard would it be to say no if someone offered to bring his parents back to life? No, he would refuse. Or he liked to think he would. Because he knew they wouldn't be happy being brought back, not like this. But it would be hard to say no if he thought they could do it. Very hard. Damn it. We've gotta find her and talk some sense into her, now. He ran out the door, hearing rapid footsteps behind him as Shizune rose. He took one step outside and turned, only to be greeted by a shocking sight. Pervy sage. The Sannin had seen better days. His entire body trembled as he struggled to stay on his feet, leaning against the nearby wall for support, one eye clenched shut in pain. The white-haired sage reached out for them. She slipped me a Mickey. The two ran over to him. Naruto took his side, letting the man lean on him to keep him up as Shizune raised a glowing hand to his chest. "I can treat the symptoms, but with no way to remove the poison, there's only so much I can do." "Seriously, how the hell did you miss that?" Naruto asked in disbelief. "Hey, would you suspect an old friend of something like this?" Jiraiya asked back, his voice more than a little rough, and that drew the blonde up short. Okay, yeah. Naruto would probably end up in the same position as Jiraiya right now. "Listen, this is serious," Naruto said. "Tsunade's gone to meet with Orochimaru," Shizune picked up for him. She then explained what had happened before they arrived in the town, how Orochimaru had destroyed the castle to make his big entrance, the standoff between the Sannin and their apprentices, and how Tsunade had been wandering around the town until today. Jiraiya took it all in grimly. "Well, I don't need to tell you, we've got no time to waste," he said, rising to his feet. "I still can't control my chakra well, but this will have to do." He looked at the medical kunoichi. "Take us there." She nodded, and the three immediately took to the rooftops, bounding from building to building as they made their way to the meeting place. "Hey, pervy sage. There's no way she'd agree to this, right?" "I'd like to say no, but I haven't seen her in decades," was Jiraiya's answer. Naruto glanced at him and saw him looking ahead, grim determination written all over his face. Tsunade was never able to get over the grief of losing them both, Shizune said. I believe in her, but either she wanted to try and take him down on her own while he's weak or… No matter what, it's safe to say there's a battle waiting for us. Be ready, brat, Jiraiya said. Like I need you to tell me that. Naruto shot back, and they raced onward. Naruto wasn't sure what he expected to find when they reached their meeting place, but he could safely say it wasn't what he saw when they reached it. A fight had taken place here, that was for sure. The nearby wall had a huge section that had practically exploded outward. Boulders dozens of times his size had been shattered and reduced to rubble. Jagged craters littered the area, some large enough that a house could fit inside, surrounded by fissures that spread from their borders. Looks like she turned them down after all, Jiraiya said, stating the obvious as his eyes scanned the battlefield. However, he continued, she must have wanted to play along to get the jump on him. Looks like it didn't work out. Did Tsunade do all this? Naruto said in amazement as he looked at the devastation. Yep. Don't let Tsunade's looks fool you, piss her off, and she can easily send you flying 50 miles with one punch. Jiraiya said there was a fondness there, but at the same time, something told Naruto he'd been on the receiving end of that strength before. Either way, I better not make her mad, Naruto thought as he eyed the craters. I already knew that was a bad idea, but… The Uzumaki survivor noticed Shizune looked dejected and immediately guessed why. Hey, don't blame yourself. She was acting really squirrely from the sound of it. Not to mention that she went as far as knocking you out. I'm sure she won't hold it against you. Even so, Shizune replied. We can talk that out with Tsunade later. She could probably use a hand. Now, Jiraiya pointed out, and with that, they were on the move again. It wasn't hard to find them, all they had to do was follow the trail of destruction. They jumped into action when they saw an explosion of dirt and debris in the distance, each shooting forward with the body flicker technique. They appeared in between Tsunade and her attacker in a burst of smoke, but when it cleared, Naruto's eyes widened, and he gaped at the purple-clad teen. Jiraiya's eyes, meanwhile, were honed on his fellow Sannin, standing behind him. The snake summoner of the Sannin seemed unconcerned by their arrival. He smirked as he looked at his old teammate. Ku. Jiraiya, long time no see. Orochimaru, you haven't changed a bit since we last met. Still got that evil look in your eyes, Jiraiya replied, almost as if all this was just a reunion of old friends. Naruto tensed, his expression twisted with fury. Kabuto, you were with him the whole time. So you noticed. The traitor replied with a smirk. He tilted his head and adjusted his glasses. A few months ago, and I'd have guessed that would have gone completely over your head. Then again, I have to wonder if you've gotten any smarter than your days in the academy. After all, you were stupid enough to follow them here. Kabuto raised a brow as he let his glasses fall, revealing the cold look in his eyes. Or did you think that demon would be any use here? In a battle of the legendary Sannin, you're completely useless. Naruto snarled, his legs tensing, readying to spring himself forward as his feet dug into the dirt. But he held himself back. Naruto, Jiraiya called out. I know. Naruto cut him off. His eyes turned back to their foes. I don't need you to tell me. Memories flashed before his mind. His team's encounter with Orochimaru during the exams. How easily Itachi and Kisame cornered him and Sasuke. I'm totally out of my league here. But there was no way he could sit back and do nothing while Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Shizune went off to fight. If there was anything at all he could do. Well, one thing came to mind. But would it do any good here? Their standoff was broken when Tsunade ran forward. Out of the way. She closed the distance, fist reared back. Ready to lay every ounce of the strength Naruto could see in the ruins around them into her next blow. But it never came. Kabuto lifted his arm and cut his wrist, spraying blood in an arc with a swipe of his injured arm. It covered Suon, and she froze, trembling. Too bad, Kabuto said. For one of the Sannin to be so weak at the sight of a little blood. Naruto, already ready to move, immediately sprung into action. He formed a cross-hand seal. 4 clones burst into existence in front of him. Naruto, stop, Jiraiya said, starting to move, only to jerk in pain. He still wasn't over the poison. Damn it, Tsunade. Then let's see you do something. Naruto yelled as his clones charged forward, and 6 chains burst from his back and dug into the ground. 2 clones vanished with body flickers, only for Kabuto to duck as they sailed over his head. He flipped backward as the chains burst from the ground, weaving around them in the air and knocking one away with his kunai. The clones came at him from 4 directions, but he made short work of them. He ducked and elbowed the first that came from behind him, twisted his body to dodge the second, putting his kunai through its shoulder. He leaned and fell back to the ground, kicking up with his left leg and dispersing the next clone that came from in front of him before pushing himself into the air with his hands just in time to strike the last one with a glowing green hand. The whole exchange didn't take 10 seconds. But that was fine. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki hadn't been expecting much. 1 chain had wrapped around Tsunade. The lynx rose from the ground before they reeled her in. They dispersed as she neared, and he braced her with both hands, letting her rest on the ground. Naruto had aimed to get Tsunade out of the fire. Lady Tsunade, Shizune called as she kneeled beside them. What's wrong with her? Naruto asked, looking between the 2 women in concern and confusion. When my uncle, her hands were covered in his blood. Ever since, Shizune explained. A medical ninja who freezes at the sight of blood. A sorry spectacle, wouldn't you agree? Kabuto said, drawing Naruto's ire. Kabuto, Orochimaru called. He'd been so furious with Kabuto that he'd only watched the injured Sannin out of the corner of his eye. It was his first time seeing what the man who'd nearly brought ruin to Konoha and Suna actually looked like. If Naruto had to describe him in a few words, it would be, a snake pretending to be a human. He had bone-white skin, golden snake-like eyes surrounded with purple markings, and long, straight black hair. Oddly, he wore the same clothes as when he'd been disguised as a Kunoichi, a tan tunic, a black shirt with grayish-black pants tied with bandages at the ankles, and black sandals. You're bleeding quite heavily, the snake Sannin noted. Lord Orochimaru, please remove your left bandage, Kabuto replied. The legendary rogue ninja raised his left hand. Slowly, shakingly. He bit at the bandages covering his arm and undid them. They fell to the ground, revealing rotting purple skin. Could Tsunade have fixed that? Whoa. But more important was the summoning tattoo on his arm. Damn it, Naruto snarled. So that's what you have in mind, Jiraiya said as he bit into his finger and made hand seals as Kabuto ran a bloodied finger along Orochimaru's tattoo. Summoning jutsu. The 2 called out at once, slamming their hands to the ground. There were 2 explosions of smoke as the jutsu took effect, both sides calling forth their summons to aid them. But there was a problem. While the one called forth by the Oto ninja was large enough to cover a block in its shadow, the one made by Jiraiya was only knee-high. When they cleared, they revealed that Kabuto had summoned 3 massive, familiar-looking snakes. Jiraiya, on the other hand, had summoned. Yo, Gamakichi said, raising one leathery hand in greeting. Hey, Naruto. Did you call me? Both Naruto and Jiraiya could only stare in shock, mouth agape. Wah, what the? Where's your father? The Sannin exclaimed. Pops. I guess that wasn't enough to summon him. So, what's going on? The tiny toad asked. Jiraiya. Still playing the fool, I see, Orochimaru said far above, loudly enough for them to hear him, his voice dripping with amusement. The poison must be, Shizune said, staring at them with dread. Crap, he thought they'd be even when he heard about Orochimaru's arms. They were deep in it here. Fine then. Naruto rose to his feet, biting his thumb. He could at least do this much. He glared up at the 2 traitors as he ran through hand signs. Gamakichi, get somewhere safe. This is about to get hairy. He said, the tiny toad jumping in fear as he noticed the snakes. Please, someone who can get us out of this. I know I'm a new summoner, but I'm begging here. We need the best we can get. He raised his hand high. Help us out, and I'll give you all the thanks in the land of fire. He slammed his palm into the ground, and there was an explosion of smoke. It was about the same size as Jiraiya's. No way. Did I screw up? Now, Naruto yelled, shock, horror, and despair at his failure written all over his face. How could he blow it at a time like this? In this way, had all his training been for nothing? Jiraiya was looking at the summoning with his mouth hanging open. Then he gasped as the smoke began to clear. Gamakichi let out a yelp as the figure in the smoke slowly became visible. Far above, while Naruto couldn't see, Orochimaru smirked at the sorry display beneath him. Then, as the smoke began to clear, that smirk fell. It was replaced with a look of concern. "Well, Jiraiya boy," an old but firm voice said from the smoke. "I felt a new summoner call out, and he seemed pretty desperate. I thought I'd see what was what. I didn't expect to see you here. But you don't look so good. Is something wrong? Need Ma to whip you up something?" The toad was about 3 times the size of Gamakichi, not that that was saying much. He was green, with white hair styled in somewhat of a mohawk, very thick eyebrows, and a small goatee. Wrinkles along his forehead, eyes, and mouth showed his age. He wore only a light gray cape. "Gramps," Gamakichi exclaimed in disbelief. All that, and that's the best he could do." "I suppose he hasn't improved as much as I thought," Kabuto said in amusement. "That's unfortunate," Orochimaru said, staring at the green toad below. "Indeed. If this is the best they can do, this will hardly be a challenge," Kabuto replied. "No," Orochimaru replied as his eyes narrowed. "Aw man, what did I do wrong?" Naruto exclaimed, hands on his head. "Naruto, quiet," Jiraiya yelled before kneeling. "Sorry, Lord Fukusaku. This isn't a big enough deal to call you, but—" The old toad waved him off. Don't worry about it, Jiraiya boy. I'm the one who decided to answer the summon. Besides, it got me out of arguing with Ma over dinner. Speaking of. No thanks. I've got a lot of work ahead of me, Jiraiya quickly replied while Naruto looked between the two in disbelief. "So, you must be the Naruto I've heard about," the toad said. "Just call me Fukusaku. Don't worry, I'll get you out of this." Really?" Naruto asked, perplexed. He might call BS if it weren't for how the pervy sage reacted. Above, Orochimaru's gaze remained fixed on the toad as it turned to look at them with a gaze of iron. "That is one of the 2 great sage toads of Mount Myoboku." "What?" Kabuto exclaimed, looking from him to the toad in shock. "So, it's Orochimaru, huh? He's still up to no good, I see. And with Jiraiya boy in the state he's in, it's a good thing I answered your call," Fukusaku said. "Thank you, Lord Fukusaku. I'll be sure to bring you and Lady Shima a gift the next time I come around," Jiraiya said, eyes returning to his former teammate. "Thank you kindly. But I still say you should join us for dinner tonight. Ma's cooking will have you right as rain," Fukusaku said with a smile. Jiraiya jerked again. His expression looked almost desperate as he briefly looked back to Fukusaku. "Sorry, but I've got a student to look after. Not to mention, I need to get Tsunade back to Konoha ASAP." Fukusaku glanced behind him and saw Tsunade. She was still in Shizun's arms, trembling as she watched them with wide eyes. Still suffering from those memories, are you?" He looked back to Orochimaru. "I can't say I blame you. I know how shattered I'd be if something happened to Ma. But you have to move past it. You'll miss too much if you let life pass you by, not to mention let everyone else who could be in your heart slip through your fingers. And I can't speak for the dead, but I know I'd want Ma to live on if something happened to me." Up above, Orochimaru was still staring down at Fukusaku. "Kabuto," he said, too quietly for them to hear him down there. When the spectacled teen looked at him, he said, "Kill the boy. It would be best to send that toad back to their mountain." Kabuto adjusted his glasses, the sun glinting off the lenses. "As you wish." There was a moment of stillness, and then the 3 snakes lunged towards them, their fanged maws wide and ready to swallow them. The old toad turned his head and opened his mouth. A light seemed to shine from his throat, and then what looked like a blue beam shot out. He cleanly sliced the 3 snakes' heads off with a single sweep of his head. "What the hell?" Naruto gaped. It hadn't even taken him a second to take those things out. As the heads fell, their blood flying along the path of the attack, Orochimaru and Kabuto leapt off the falling heads. In a moment, Fukusaku was between them. He twisted his body, punching at Orochimaru and kicking at Kabuto. The two shifted in the air to dodge. Then, the air itself seemed to dig into Orochimaru's cheek and Kabuto's chest before they went flying in different directions, each shattering a boulder before crashing into the ground. Fukusaku continued, flipping and landing on the falling body of one of the snakes before launching himself at the snake summoner of the Sannin. Huh. Naruto had just enough time to voice before Jiraiya sprung into action. Shizune, I'm leaving Kabuto to you, the Toad Summoner said as he shot off after his former teammate before Naruto could ask what the hell the geezer of a toad just did. Right, Shizune said. She made sure Tsunade was sitting upright before running off to face Kabuto. Naruto looked between the battles before growling, his hands clenching at his sides. It was almost like he was back on his first real mission, watching Kakashi and Zabuza face off again. He felt useless, just standing there. He could at least feel good about summoning the old toad, but he wanted to be out there himself. He still had so far to go. The only thing he could think to do was walk over to Tsunade. Gamakichi hopped over to his side and then leapt onto his shoulder. Wow, a fight between those three. You sure seem to get yourself dragged into the craziest things, the small toad said. Trust me, you don't know the half of it. Remind me to tell you about my first mission next time we hang out around Konoha, Naruto said as they reached Tsunade. Hey, are you alright? Tsunade's eyes went to him, but she didn't say anything. She just trembled with wide eyes. Naruto guessed that she was barely here, right now. She was a far cry from any version of her he'd seen so far. Both the bitter woman who didn't hesitate to speak her mind and the fierce legendary Kunoichi he'd only caught a glimpse of. He frowned as he looked her over, putting his hand on her shoulder. Man, I wish I had something to wipe the blood off. He began to get frustrated as he tried and failed to think of how to help her. Come on, you're the granddaughter of the first Hokage, aren't you? You know what Orochimaru's planning, right? The people you lost both loved our village, didn't they? What would they say if they saw you sitting here with all this going on? I can't do anything, but you could. What would you say if Shizune or the pervy sage get killed while you're sitting here? No response. Damn it, what could he do? Then, Naruto's eyes widened as his senses screamed at him. He could feel the ground beneath him shift in a way he'd become familiar with over the past few months. He grabbed Tsunade and shot into the air just in time to dodge as Kabuto burst from the ground, grasping for him with a hand covered in green chakra. Immediately, Naruto called upon the Kyuubi's power, his eyes shifting crimson while his hands turned to claws and his teeth to fangs. It was the only way he'd have any chance against someone like this. The blonde could tell the spy was on the same level as Kakashi-sensei from how he handled his clones before. Good instincts, Kabuto complimented. Hey, nice try, but Sakura tries that trick on me all the time when we spar, Naruto said with a grin he didn't feel. He put Tsunade down and summoned 4 shadow clones. One grabbed Gamakichi, who yelped as it sped off with him. Kabuto ignored the toad and watched as Naruto and his 3 clones stood protectively before Suon. Worried about her? Don't be. Lord Orochimaru still needs her, and she's hardly a threat now. You, though. You made yourself a nuisance the moment you summoned that sage toad. The Oto ninja smirked, holding out a kunai while the sun glinted off his glasses. A shame. You had such big dreams, but you had to go and get in over your head. Just like little kids always do. The 3 Narutos tensed, ready to defend themselves. It was then that Shizune rejoined the fray. She came at Kabuto from the side, swiping at him with a kunai. He weaved and ducked beneath 3 strikes of her kunai before diving underground again. Naruto called forth his chains once more, sending them into the ground. They dug through the earth beneath Shizune, and just as Naruto expected, the ground shifted as something dug away from her. Then, it started to speed towards him. The 3 Narutos jumped into the air as Kabuto burst from the ground beneath him again. This time, he spat out a Senbon like a bullet, hitting the Naruto in the middle right in a pressure point. Only for it to burst into smoke, just a shadow clone. The 2 remaining Narutos quickly retaliated. One slammed his palms together while the other threw a shuriken. Wind style, gale palm. As the resulting blast of wind slammed into the shuriken, seals appeared on the metal star, releasing dozens more that fell in a hail upon Kabuto, only for the Oto ninja to dive back underground. Naruto landed on a boulder while his clones landed on its sides. Making another cross-shaped hand seal, they all vanished in a cloud of smoke. When it cleared, it revealed 5 Narutos, 4 standing protectively around the boulder, as Shizune appeared next to him with a body flicker. "You need to get out of here," she yelled. "He's after me because of the geezer toad. You think he's going to let me go anywhere?" Naruto shot back, his eyes roaming the battlefield. Once more, Kabuto burst from the ground. This time, behind them. He ran forward. Naruto sent a series of chains at him while 2 of his clones vanished in bursts of speed. Kabuto weaved around the chains, kicked himself to the side as one of the clones passed him, and then leapt into the air as the other slammed into the ground where he stood, creating an explosion of debris. As the remaining Naruto clones stood protectively in front of the boulder, Shizune ran forward and threw a kunai before raising her arm, revealing a launcher that fired Senbon at the Oto ninja. Kabuto spun in midair, knocking the kunai aside as he spun, moving just right for the Senbon to bounce off of his forehead protector. The medical kunoichi and the clones blitzed Kabuto at once, the 2 Narutos using their speed to leap to and fro while Shizune met him in taijutsu. While the brunette dodged Kabuto's attacks, the clones were soon taken out by palm swipes as they passed by Kabuto. Left alone, Shizune exchanged blows with Kabuto as Naruto formed a hand seal to summon more clones. Just as he was about to call them out, Shizune threw a punch at Kabuto, only for him to twist and slide around it, the attack passing behind him as he struck her back with a glowing green hand. Shizune coughed up blood as Naruto's clones formed, stumbling as he moved behind her and struck her right shoulder. She turned and tried to retaliate, but with her left arm limp and her movements slowed, Kabuto easily blocked the attack, gripping her arm and landing a blow on her stomach before flipping her onto her back. She let out a cry as she crashed into the ground as the clones finally blurred into the fray. Kabuto turned to them, but his eyes widened as Shizune breathed deep and exhaled a cloud of poison, and she, Kabuto and the clones vanished within. Naruto's teeth clenched as he sensed his clones being destroyed in the fog. He was on his own. He knew it was wishful thinking that Kabuto would go down like that. The blonde summoned 2 more clones to protect his boulder as he watched. Then, the ground beneath the boulder collapsed, a cloud of dirt rising into the air. The 5 Narutos jumped back as the boulder vanished into the earth, one in the back, while the others stood between him and the dust cloud. Kabuto shot forward, a glowing green hand jabbing the Uzumaki in the chest. And he vanished into smoke. Hiding among the clones, huh? That won't save you for long, Kabuto said, turning to the clones as they regrouped. Naruto immediately summoned another to replace the one that he'd lost. Big talk. Aren't you supposed to be on Kakashi-sensei's level? He'd have made mincemeat of me by now, Naruto shot back. You have a point. I guess I should stop playing around. With that, Kabuto shot forward. Naruto summoned more clones before a dozen chains of chains burst from Naruto's back, flying at Kabuto or digging into the ground. The clones scattered, some standing protectively between Naruto and Kabuto, some charging, and some leaping back for a better vantage point and throwing kunai and air bullets. Kabuto weaved and leapt around the chains and air spheres, destroyed any clones that neared him with precision strikes despite their speed, and batted aside the kunai with his own. He jumped as chains burst from the ground to ensnare him, flipping and landing in a crouch before veering off toward one of the clones protecting Naruto. He fell back as it launched a punch at him, swiping it as he passed. He flipped, landing in a crouch and tossing a seal tag to the side. A seal trap. Did you think I wouldn't notice? He launched himself at the Naruto in the center. The clones threw explosive kunai at the ground. Kabuto vanished in the blast, only to reappear behind Naruto. The Kyuubi's power allowed Naruto to block swipes from a glowing green palm and a kunai, but he couldn't even try to get a hit in. The clones rushed to help him as Kabuto stabbed forward with his kunai. It was all Naruto could do to raise his hand and let it stab his right palm. Kabuto smirked, turning back and preparing to launch himself at one solitary Naruto standing a bit farther away from the rest. Only for the Naruto he stabbed to grasp his hand. Naruto grinned as Kabuto looked back at him in shock. Kabuto had thought he'd been using a clone as a decoy again, just like he'd hoped. Chains burst from Naruto's back, twisting to ensnare Kabuto as the spy stabbed him with his left hand, covered in green chakra. Naruto just barely grabbed it with his Kyuubi-powered speed. He couldn't stop it, but he could drive it to stab into his right shoulder rather than his heart, gritting his teeth as he felt muscle sliced apart at the touch before his chains wrapped around the Oto ninja's arms. As Kabuto made that final attack, more chains burst from the backs of Naruto's clones and sped towards him. Ensnared by the real one's chains, he couldn't dodge. Kabuto cried out as the spiked chains impaled him. 2 went through his stomach, 1 through his right lung, and 1 through his heart. Crimson specks spattered over Naruto as the spikes emerged from the Oto ninja's torso. His grin had fallen, looking up at the now trembling purple-clad team with a grimace, swallowing thickly as he felt bile start to fight up his throat. Wah! What? No! Kabuto breathed as he stared at Naruto with wide eyes. The chains impaling him then pulled back, causing him to fall onto his back as they all dispersed. He lay still, dead, before he hit the ground. Naruto stood back, shuddering as a cold feeling spread through him as he looked at the older teen's lifeless eyes. It was different from Haku. Kabuto wasn't a good person, serving someone evil because he'd had nowhere else to go, though he may have been like that once. He'd seen it in his eyes once he dropped the act. Kabuto was a stone-cold killer, serving someone who had killed the third Hokage and gotten who knows how many people killed not too long ago, so say nothing of whatever else he may have helped with. Not like Gaara, either. For as dangerous as he was still a kid, and Naruto could understand and empathize with how he ended up the way he did. Maybe Kabuto had had a story like his and Haku's, too. But if so, he couldn't guess at it. Besides, as much as he wouldn't have wanted to, he'd have killed Gaara if he had to. He was glad it didn't play out that way, but things were different this time. He could only look down at Kabuto as he breathed deeply, the adrenaline fading and a cold feeling in his chest. On top of that had been far too close. Had Kabuto guessed at his ruse, had those chains been just a second later, or had he not been using the Kyuubi's power? He looked down, seeing Kabuto's blood on him and feeling ill. Naruto. He looked up to see Shizune trying to move toward him with a look of worry, snapping him out of his thoughts. Are you all right? Naruto shook his head. Right, he had to keep his head in the game. Things were calm here, but the pervy sage and the geezer toad were still fighting Orochimaru. He could dwell on this later. Their lives were still on the line. Yeah, He stilled. Kabuto's death had weighed so heavily on his mind that he hadn't noticed. His wide eyes looked down to his arm, which still hung limp at his side, blood dripping from his palmed palm. What the? Why isn't it healing? Naruto thought frantically. That last strike severed that part of your chakra network. You won't recover for a few hours. The Kyuubi explained. What? Oh, that's just great. Naruto thought with a grimace. As he wasn't useless enough here. Be thankful it wasn't your heart. I know, Naruto thought back. That had been too close. The blonde had been extremely lucky that worked. If Naruto hadn't used the Kyuubi's power. If the chains had been just a little slower. Or if Kabuto hadn't underestimated him. He'd be dead right now. But now he couldn't even summon anything. He shook those thoughts off and began to run towards Shizune. Forget about me, are you alright? Looks like things have settled down over there. Jiraiya thought. He could sense no signs of battle, and they'd heard Kabuto cry out a second ago. That Fukusaku was still here was a good sign. Still, he couldn't help but feel a bit anxious to know what had gone on over there. The honored toad had to know what had happened, but saying it now would mean Orochimaru would know, too. He'd just have to wait. Nevertheless, he kept his eyes trained on Orochimaru, who glanced in the direction of his subordinate. Worried? How unlike you. Orochimaru chuckled. Oh, not at all. Kabuto is a valued subordinate. There's little doubt he has them handled, but if not, I can always find another. Besides, if I really need him, I can always bring him back to life in time, Jiraiya's face twisted in disgust at the implication. He'd heard all about how Orochimaru had summoned the fallen Hokages. Nothing good can come from violating the laws of life and death in such a way, Fukusaku said. Orochimaru chuckled again, grinning maliciously. I heard enough of that from Sarutobi-sensei. Jiraiya growled. He was far too experienced to rise to that bait, but he was sorely tempted to punch his former teammate's face in for that line. But, I suppose it would be remiss of me not to at least check on my subordinate. I did give him a rather important task, after all, the snake summoner said. That got Jiraiya moving. He and Fukusaku launched themselves at Orochimaru, only for him to vanish into the ground, sinking into the earth as if it were water. Fukusaku, in tune with the energy around him, immediately turned to a large boulder. There, Jiraiya turned to see Orochimaru merged with the stone, half of his torso rising from it as he landed on his hands. He opened his mouth, and thousands of snakes poured out, hissing as they moved towards them. Then they, in turn, opened their fanged maws, revealing countless copies of Orochimaru's Kusanagi. Jiraiya shot back as Fukusaku took place in front of the swarm. In his current condition, the best he could do is summon a swamp to sink them in, but with that many, they'd climb over each other. Fukusaku inhaled and breathed out a stream of wind that scattered the serpents, turning his head this way and that, blades of wind in the gale ripping them apart. And then, Orochimaru emerged from the side of the tide of snakes, his legs merged into a serpent's tail. He slithered along the ground at breakneck speeds. Jiraiya shot forward, leaping into the air and weaving hand seals, only for Orochimaru to turn to him, his tongue shooting out like a bullet. It slammed into his chest with such force that he felt his ribs quake at the impact. As he was sent flying, he saw Fukusaku turn his windstorm on Orochimaru. Orochimaru was ripped off of the ground and torn into 4 pieces, his upper torso flying away from the rest of his body before Fukusaku had to turn the wind back on the snakes. But then, hands emerged from his mouth, forcing it open. Like a snake shedding its skin, Orochimaru emerged unscathed from his ruined body and shot towards the other battlefield. Jiraiya flipped, landed on the body of one of the giant snakes, and launched himself at the legendary traitor, desperate to reach him before something terrible happened. Naruto was running towards Shizune, his arm hanging limply and blood trickling from his palm. He knew he'd be fine. He'd just had to wait. Once his chakra was flowing to his arm again, he'd be right as rain in no time. At worst, he'd be fine by morning. In the meantime, it was better to leave the kunai in until he could put a bandage on it. He was more worried about Shizune. Whatever Kabuto did must have been serious if she couldn't heal it. Look out! The Kyuubi shouted within his mind. Naruto immediately moved, bolting away with all the speed the Kyuubi's power granted him. Barely a second later, a blur rose and fell, the ground exploding where he'd been. And from that dust cloud shot Orochimaru. Naruto's eyes widened in panic as his chains shot out. The snake summoner weaved around them before leaping forward, his serpenting lower body shifting back into legs. With the speed granted to him by the Kyuubi, he'd been able to hold out against Kabuto for a few moments. Against Orochimaru when he wasn't playing around. Even without his arms. It was barely 3 seconds. Naruto blocked a kick, then ducked when the Sannin opened his mouth and a sword emerged, swiping above his head. Then he was kicked in the chin. Orochimaru spun as he was driven into the air and drove his foot into his chest so hard that he coughed up blood and went flying through a boulder before crashing into another with enough force to crack it. Naruto! Shizune cried, trying and failing to rise to her feet as Orochimaru blurred forward, the sword emerging from his mouth. Naruto didn't have time to recover. He clenched his eyes shut even as he moved to get out of the way. He heard the blade cut through flesh and bone, but instead of pain, he felt blood spray across his face. He stopped and opened his eyes to see Tsunade in front of him, trembling as she held the blade. The sword had pierced through her chest, but he could tell it was nowhere vital, its tip was only an inch from his face. They all seemed to freeze as she slowly turned to look at him, then back to Orochimaru. Then she stopped trembling. What? Orochimaru had just enough time to ask before he was sent flying by a blow from Tsunade. He flew through 2 boulders before creating a long trench in the earth, finally coming to a stop beneath the bodies of his snakes. Naruto could only stare as Tsunade stood there, her back to him. She calmly pulled out the blade and tossed it to the side before a glow enveloped her body. He watched as the wound healed as quickly as his own did when he called upon his tenant's power. Naruto, she said, looking over her shoulder at him. See to Shizune as best you can. I'll handle this. Right. Naruto ran towards the brunette as the healer of the Sannin walked over to where her traitorous teammate had vanished. As he kneeled beside the younger of the two medical ninjas, Orochimaru emerged. He was covered in dirt but otherwise looked none the worse for wear. But, how? Orochimaru asked. Ever since that day. I know. Talk about pathetic, huh? Having to sit on the sidelines while a genin was fighting a jonin because of a little blood, she shook her head before looking down at her hand. You know, he had a point. If those two could have seen me just now, I don't know what they would have said. But that ends today. I've run away from my responsibilities long enough. The hopes of everyone I've lost are riding on my shoulders, and I'm not going to ignore that anymore. She then pointed her thumb at her chest. That's why, starting today, I'm the 5th Hokage of Konoha. And I'm not going to let you threaten my people another second. You, Hokage. Orochimaru wondered aloud. Before he could say anything more, Jiraiya arrived, leaping high from a boulder and whipping his head around. Strands of his hair shot out as needles. Tsunade then slammed her fist into the ground. Naruto's jaw dropped as the earth split in two. A crevice at least 24 yards wide and going as far as the eye could see opened in the ground beneath Orochimaru. Jiraiya launched himself at Orochimaru, an orb of chakra forming in his hand. He slammed the Rasengan into his chest. He cried out for a moment before it burst, sending him flying while Jiraiya landed on the other side. Damn, I can't even complete the jutsu, Jiraiya cursed. As Orochimaru bounced off the ground, Tsunade was in front of him in a flash. An uppercut sent him flying well over 100 feet in the air before she appeared above him and brought down her leg in an axe kick. Orochimaru shot back down with the speed of a bullet, crashing into the earth and kicking up a cloud of dirt large enough to rise above the bodies of his snakes. Tsunade landed, taking a fighting stance. But that was the end. When the dust cleared, the snake summoner was nowhere in sight. I can't feel his presence, the Kyuubi said. It seems he decided to cut his losses. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief and released his hold on the Kyuubi's power. It wasn't long before Fukusaku arrived. I don't feel him. It seems the battle is over, for now. Jiraiya sighed. Yeah, but this isn't the last we've heard of him. I was hoping to end this today. Take your victories where you can, Fukusaku advised. You've won, and from the looks of it, Tsunade's finally moved past the trauma. Yeah, I noticed, Jiraiya replied before smiling at his old teammate. So, you've decided to take up the third's offer, huh? Tsunade closed her eyes. Well, it has been a while since I've laid eyes on the village my grandfather built. Besides, I should see how the medical program's gotten along without me. There was a moment of silence before Jiraiya spoke again. Tsunade, I'm sorry I wasn't there after. Don't be, Tsunade cut him off. We both made mistakes, she then smirked at her old teammate. Though, unlike someone I can think of, I actually learned from them. Jiraiya chuckled. Hey, there's a difference between not knowing and not caring. Tsunade just huffed at that. Well, I'm glad to see you've finally got your head back on straight. Time's precious, you know, Fukusaku said. Anyway, looks like my work here's done. Thanks a bunch, Geezer Toad, Naruto said, raising his good arm. I owe you big time. Naruto. Jiraiya snapped. It's no problem. Honestly, it's refreshing, Fukusaku replied. Well, I'll be heading on home. He looked at Naruto and said. I can't wait to introduce you to the missus. I'm sure she'll take a shine to you. With that, he vanished in a puff of smoke. It was at that time that the clone holding Gamakichi returned, leaping onto the scene from afar. Whoa, almost like riding on Pop's head when he's jumping around, the young toad said. He looked around. So, is everything over? Yep, Naruto said, but it was without his usual enthusiasm. He'd spied Kabuto's body while looking at the clone. That brought that memory back. Something wrong? Gamakichi asked, leaping onto his shoulder and looking concerned. Naruto suddenly didn't feel like talking. That cold feeling had come back. He just gestured his head towards Kabuto. Oh, that guy, the little toad seemed to realize what he was getting at. You take him out. Naruto's reaction said it all. Hey, better him than you, right? You should listen to him, Tsunade said, walking in front of him. Listen, kid, I'm a medic. The whole reason I'm a ninja is to preserve life, and even then, this is normal. Naruto didn't reply. The healer of the Sannin kneeled in front of him and said, "But it's good that you still feel this way, even over a piece of scum. Hold on to that. Just don't let it get you killed, okay?" Naruto blinked and looked up at her. She smiled, and he returned it a bit and nodded. Tsunade then reached out for his arm. She gently held his hand and grasped the kunai. "Hold still." Naruto was a bit annoyed at that. "You don't have to tell me that. I'm not some little kid, you know." She grinned and slowly pulled out the kunai. Naruto winced before she held his hand with a green glow. Her soft touch warmed his hand, and when she took her hand away, the wound healed. Naruto blinked as he raised his hand to look at it, seeing no sign of injury. "Well, I'd say you've more than impressed me. Guess I lost again," Suan said before taking off her necklace. "This belonged to my grandfather, and now it's yours. Take care of it, okay?" Naruto looked at it, remembering what Shizune had told him. He nodded. "Of course I will. Don't worry, it'll be in good hands." Tsunade smiled, then raised the green crystal above his head, sliding it onto his neck. He held the crystal in his hand. Then, Tsunade kissed him on his forehead. He looked up in bewilderment. "Thanks for reminding me of some important things I spent the last few decades trying to forget." Naruto grinned, as did everyone else in the clearing. Mission accomplished. Orochimaru let out a yell, knocking down a tree with a kick as the pain got to him again. Another failure. A costly one, no less. Kabuto had been one of his oldest subordinates and his most valuable. And not just for his medical skills. Akatsuki had tried and failed to turn him, and he'd been his spy in their group ever since, feeding them only what he wanted them to know and gleaming their plans from the scraps of information they gave him. Now that was gone, he'd be blind to their operations. And once they learned he was dead, they'd no doubt quickly move on all the bases he'd identified. That was little trouble since he knew which bases those were. Nevertheless, he'd have to move quickly. His mind turned to Sasuke, his intended vessel. Perhaps. No, not now. Without Kabuto to help stem his arm's decay, he'd need to replace it soon. And that was without factoring in Akatsuki coming for him and what he stole from them. With a growl, he realized he didn't have the time to entice Sasuke to come to him or even try to take him by force. So be it. It was a good thing that Orochimaru had prepared a substitute when he'd realized how much closer the Uchiha was to his friends than he anticipated, just in case. Perhaps he'd acted too rashly here and in the invasion. But that was of little concern. An immortal had an eternity to learn from his mistakes. He'd bide his time for now. Let Konoha, the villages, and Akatsuki fight amongst themselves while he grew in power. And then, the day would come when all he desired would be in his hands, and this world would be dyed crimson. It would be beautiful. Orochimaru chuckled, growing into laughter that echoed through the empty area. Naruto could only wonder how Tsunade felt as he watched as she took in the sight of their home. What was it like to see the village for the first time in decades? This place sure has changed. Tsunade mused as she looked down from the edge of the academy rooftop. She had one leg propped up on the ledge, her arm resting on her knee. What did the village look like all those years ago? Naruto wanted to ask, but even he could read the room well enough to leave her with her thoughts. It looked like her appointment was going to go smoothly. That meant it shouldn't be long before she could see to Kakashi. Naruto grinned as he made a cross-shaped hand seal. There was a burst of smoke, and then 2 copies of him ran off and leapt off the roof. Jiraiya raised a brow. What was that about? Naruto smiled and looked up at him. Oh, I figured Sasuke and Sakura would want to be there when Kakashi-sensei wakes up. Sakura stumbled across her room, groaning as she neared the one thing she'd longed for the past hour. Her bed. Their training with Guy had been brutal today. She didn't know what it was, but something had pushed him and Lee to give an extra 50% today, on top of the 200% that they put into everything. By the end, they'd all been feeling it. Even Neji and Tenten. It was a good thing Ino trained with her team today. She was getting better, but their normal still wore her out. She might have had to help her home after what they'd been through today. She felt a little better now that she'd had a shower and gotten some clean clothes. And now, at last, she could rest. She flopped down face first into her bed and groaned into the sheets. The water had helped, but she was still sore all over. But at least she wouldn't have to move for a few hours. "Sakura, someone's at the door for you," she heard her mother call out. There was a cheeriness in her tone that the pink-haired girl didn't care to think about as she stubbornly clung to her bed. She considered telling her mother to send them away but decided against it. With a growl, she lifted her head off of the soft blanket. This had better be good. With her emerald eyes blazing with outrage, Sakura rose from her bed and dragged herself out of her room. She trudged down the halls of her home but stopped when the door came into view. She blinked. "Naruto." The blonde grinned at her. Sasuke let out a sigh as he put a freshly cleaned plate away. He put one hand on his shoulder and rolled his neck, his muscles still slightly sore from their training earlier. Now that he'd cleaned himself up and gotten something to eat, he did something he'd done a lot of since he got back to Konoha. He walked out to his balcony and sat on the wooden stool outside. He stared into the distance, at the quiet corner of Konoha where his clan compound lay. He'd been thinking a lot about his clan and his teammates. Sakura had been beside herself when he got back. She practically threw herself at him and looked him over before asking if he and Naruto were okay. She'd wanted to know why they were after the blonde and why he'd thought he hadn't left ninjas as powerful as that to Jonin. She hadn't been happy when he wouldn't tell her, but she understood wanting to wait for Naruto to return so they could get it all out at once. They had a lot to talk about. His fist clenched as he remembered his brother. After all these years, Itachi barely had a word for him. If that wasn't bad enough, he was going after Naruto. He closed his eyes, memories of the blonde, Sakura, her parents, and Kakashi filling his mind. His family, something he hadn't thought about having again before Team 7. Was this fate? Was Itachi meant to cast a shadow over everything in his life for as long as they both lived? His hand went to the mark on his neck. He was tempted to explore its power. He needed to get stronger, avenge his clan, and protect his friends. Only the memory of what that power did to him kept him from doing it. What if he wound up becoming a threat to them because of it? His brother's words all those years ago flashed through his mind, the requirement to unlock a stronger form of the Sharingan. Take the life of your best friend. You must kill him, just as I did. Would the curse mark turn him into someone who'd consider that? But would he be strong enough to fight against his brother and these, Akatsuki, next time if he didn't use it? He was broken from his thoughts when Naruto leapt onto the balcony from below. "Hey, Sasuke. What are you up to out here by yourself?" he asked with a grin. Sasuke shook his head. "Just thinking about the last few days. And the past." Naruto seemed to get what he meant because his smile fell. The Uchiha stood up with a smirk. "So, mission accomplished, I take it." Naruto brightened up, grinning and putting his hands on his hips. "Was there ever any doubt? We've got a brand new Hokage." Sasuke grunted in the affirmative. He didn't know what to think about Tsunade. As far as he knew, she had been wandering the continent for decades. Still, he guessed they'd see what kind of leader she was. Naruto then chuckled. "Just don't be surprised when you see her. She uses some souped-up transformation jutsu to look like she's in her 20s all the time." Sasuke wasn't sure what to say about that. He just raised a brow. "Anyway, she's about to see to Kakashi-sensei. Come on." Naruto ran to the ledge and gestured for him to follow. He nodded, and they both leapt from the building. It wasn't long after that the three genin had gathered together in Kakashi's hospital room. It was the first time Naruto had seen his sensei since they'd left. It wasn't as bad as he was afraid of. He'd been worried he'd been hurt badly, but the copy ninja didn't have a scratch on him. "What happened to him?" Naruto asked as Tsunade placed a glowing green hand on his head. Sasuke's fist clenched at his side. "A genjutsu. One too strong for the Sharingan to counter." Naruto glanced at his teammate as Sakura looked worriedly at their sensei, her hands before her chest. Itachi. It had to be. The blonde looked down at the ground, brow furrowed with frustration. His sensei was here because they'd been after him. His mind wandered back to the fight a few days ago when Orochimaru took him down like he was nothing. He hated that Kakashi had been stuck in that bed for over a week because he'd had to protect him. And he couldn't help but worry about Fu whenever those guys crossed his mind. They all had so far to go. He was broken from his thoughts by a quiet stirring. He looked up just in time to see Kakashi's coal-colored eye open. Half-lidded, looking kinda dazed but awake. Lady Tsunade. Kakashi-sensei. Naruto said, running to his bedside. He got a flick on the forehead from Tsunade for his troubles. A gentle one, thankfully. Brat, do I have to remind you this is a hospital? Keep it down. She turned back to her patient as he slowly sat up, pushing himself with his right arm. Speaking of brats, how'd you end up like this, Kakashi? Aren't you supposed to be a big name these days? She teased with a smirk. I overestimated myself, he answered after a moment. I thought I could meet the enemy eye to eye with my Sharingan. I should have known better. She sighed. Yeah, you should've. Just try not to wind up here again. I'm going to be busy enough as it is. Who was it? Sakura asked, stepping forward. Who attacked Kakashi-sensei? Why were they after Naruto? Then she looked at Sasuke. To Naruto's surprise, she looked upset with him. And why'd you think it was a good idea to chase after them alone? There was a moment of silence as Naruto and the rest of his team thought about how to answer. She was the only one still in the dark about everything. He glanced at Kakashi. He wasn't sure if it was best to talk about this now or wait until he was out of bed. The Jonin sighed. Lady Tsunade, I know it's not protocol, but can I ask to be discharged? From the looks of my students, they're ready for a long overdue talk, and I'd like to have some privacy. That got nods from both of them and an anxious look from Sakura. Yeah, Sasuke and I agreed. We shouldn't hold anything back anymore. I probably shouldn't, but you can handle yourself. Besides, it looks like this girl's been waiting long enough, Tsunade said before pulling out a slip of paper and writing on it. Take this to the pharmacy. Take 2 a day for 3 days. Thank you. Walking with a cane, Kakashi led the trio into his living room. Naruto glanced around. This was the first time he'd been in his sensei's home. It was a bit on the small side. A short hallway, the door to the bathroom at the side, opened up into the living room. The kitchen area sat on the left, a fridge against the wall on the other side of white counters with a sink and a stove. On the far side of the room was a sofa next to some sliding doors and across from a TV with a Chibudai table in between on a green carpet mat. From what he could see, Kakashi's bedroom was pretty standard, a large bed with blue sheets across from a counter, a nightstand, a bookshelf, and a glass door to the balcony. Naruto frowned as he noted that nothing there really said anything about their sensei, no pictures, paintings, hobbies, or decorations. However, he smiled a bit when he saw 2 pictures beneath the TV, a picture of their team, and one of his father with a young Kakashi, and 2 kids who had to be Obito and Rin. Kakashi walked to his table and sat down heavily, setting down the bottle of pills he got from the pharmacy. He looked at his students and said, well, let's get to it. First, Lady Tsunade's the last person I expected to wake up to. How long have I been out? And what happened while I was unconscious? You were there for almost 2 weeks, Sakura answered. When I found out who attacked you and who he was after, I didn't think about it. I just moved, Sasuke said. Kakashi closed his eye. I'm not surprised to hear that. Sakura looked back and forth between them. Naruto could see the question on her lips, but she didn't ask. She'd be getting her answers soon enough, anyway. They caught me alone. Or that's what we thought. The pervy sage knew they were there the whole time. He let them think they pulled one over on him, Naruto explained. Ah, pervy sage? Sakura asked, looking perplexed. Sasuke did, too. Kakashi just nodded. Ah, I see you've been introduced to that side of Master Jiraiya, the Jonin said sagely. Huh. Sakura still looked bewildered as Sasuke's eye twitched. He looked at their sensei with a half-lidded, dull look that screamed, are you serious? It took Sakura a second, and then she looked shocked. Her eyes darted from Naruto to Kakashi. Wait, you're kidding, right? Jiraiya's a huge pervert, Naruto asked, laughing at her reaction. Not that he could blame her. Yep, and he's proud of it, too. Sakura buried her face in her hands, running them down her features as her right eye twitched. She then eyed Naruto suspiciously. You didn't pick up any habits from him, did you? The blonde raised his hands defensively. Hey, I put anything like that behind me long ago. At least in public. Sakura sighed, putting one hand on her forehead. Good. I haven't forgotten about that sexy jutsu of yours, you know. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. I'm never living that down, am I? You think you deserve to? Yeah, I guess that's fair. Anyways, Kakashi interrupted, getting them back on track. From there you found Tsunade. Naruto grimaced. Yeah, but someone else crashed the party. Orochimaru. That drew alarmed reactions from the rest of his team. Sakura stepped back, eyes wide and hands brought in front of her chest. Orochimaru. Why? What was he after this time? Naruto closed his eyes. The third Hokage briefly flashed into his mind. The old man went down fighting, you know. He got him good. He did something to his arms. They looked like they were rotting, and he could barely move them. He wanted Tsunade to heal him, Kakashi deduced. Well, if she's here, she must have turned him down. But I don't imagine he'd accept that without a fight. Naruto shook his head. He wasn't alone either. Kabuto was with him. Kakashi's eyes narrowed, while Sasuke and Sakura's went wide. Kabuto? The pink-haired girl asked. Sasuke frowned deeply. He was a spy. I thought as much, Kakashi said, drawing the Genin's attention. After the prelims, we were suspicious. That wasn't the first time Kabuto made it past the second exam, only to forfeit. He did that in every exam he participated in. Hayate decided to investigate him. Hayate. Oh, the proctor. Naruto said. It took him a second to remember the sickly man. What did he find? Sasuke asked. Kakashi closed his eye. We'll probably never know, but I think we can guess. Naruto felt a coldness settle in his stomach. It was Sakura who voiced his fears. You mean? Their sensei nodded. He was found dead not long after. And Kabuto disappeared. Naruto hung his head as Sakura gasped. Sasuke closed his eyes. So that's why he wasn't at the finals. Poor guy. I did think those ninja info cards of his were weird. Even for a veteran genin, it seemed odd that he'd have that much information. Sasuke thought aloud. Info cards? Kakashi asked. They told him about the cards Kabuto had shown them. One of his jobs must have been looking for promising genin with unique abilities. Naruto cringed at that, idly thinking about the fates of any genin who caught Orochimaru's eye, thanks to Kabuto. That and what happened to Hayate made the memory of his fight with Kabuto weigh less heavily on him, just a bit. Kakashi put one hand on his chin. He can't be a run-of-the-mill spy if Orochimaru brought him along to meet Tsunade. He'd have to be one of his lieutenants, at least. I guess he'll have to be added to the bingo books. Speaking of, I meant to get you 3 copies. I'll have them by our next training session. You know, it'd probably be a good idea to hand those out to every new genin, Sakura noted, crossing her arms and frowning. It would have been nice to know who's who in the ninja world from the start. Yeah, but we won't need to worry about adding Kabuto to it, Naruto said, looking down at the floor as his teammates looked at him. He's dead, Kakashi asked, and Naruto nodded. Beside him, Sasuke narrowed his eyes. It was you, wasn't it? Sasuke asked. The blonde was making it pretty obvious. He wouldn't act this way if Tsunade or Jiraiya did the deed. Sakura looked shocked. She gasped when Naruto nodded. Not that he blamed her. It seemed unbelievable that any of them could take out someone on the level Kabuto seemed to be. He could tell it weighed heavily on him, and yet he couldn't stop his fist from clenching at his side. Could he have won had he been in the same position? How? He asked as Sakura put her hand on the blonde's shoulder. It may be a bit harsh, but he had to know. Naruto briefly grinned. Come on, you know me. I'm just that awesome, he said, trying to lighten the mood. Then, his face fell as he said, or, that's what I'd like to say, but really. It was luck. That, and Kabuto underestimated me. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Kakashi was looking at him, but he didn't care right now. Luck. I went all out on him, Naruto said, giving him a look. Sasuke got the message. The Kyuubi. After this, they had a long talk ahead of them. Naruto had to explain the whole story there. And Sasuke would tell them about that day. That sobered him up a bit. But he just tore through everything I threw at him. He saw through my traps and feints. Until the last one, he then looked at Sasuke. You remember that one sparring match we had just before the exam started? When I got one over on you by swapping with my clones. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he mentally ran through their matches. He remembered them all in perfect detail, thanks to the Sharingan. His brows rose as it hit him. You baited him a few times by switching places with clones, then used yourself as bait. He never thought you'd take that risk since he could destroy you if he got close, Kakashi deduced. Naruto nodded. Thing is, the way he got around my every trick, I don't think there's anything I could have done if that hadn't worked. Sasuke nodded. Even with the Kyuubi's power, that had been a desperate last-ditch effort. If it hadn't worked against someone like Kabuto. Why were you fighting him in the first place? Sakura asked. Granny Tsunade. I guess she wanted to try to handle Orochimaru herself, so she slipped the pervy sage something that made it hard to use his chakra and went off to deal with him alone. We managed to track them down, but Jiraiya was worse off than Orochimaru, and Tsunade was out of it. I knew there wasn't much I could do, so I tried to summon something to help. I wound up getting this super geezer toad. He wasn't even half as big as me, but he took down 3 of Orochimaru's snakes in a second. And now they had the whole picture. Sasuke wasn't sure how he felt about it all. He was jealous that Orochimaru thought he was a threat, but that was only because of the toad. Naruto beat Kabuto, but only because he hadn't taken him seriously. If his match with Fu hadn't taught him of the pitfalls of being arrogant, that would have driven it home. Let that be a lesson to you, Kakashi said, drawing their attention and Sasuke from his thoughts. Kabuto's not the first ninja to lose a fight he had no business losing because he looked down on his opponent. And he won't be the last. Kakashi paused for a moment, then looked from Sasuke to Sakura. How've you two been faring while I was out? Guy's been training us, Sasuke answered. He put us through the ringer today. Sakura added. That's about what I expected, Kakashi replied. Now that we're all caught up, it's time for a long overdue conversation. There was a moment of silence. None of this would be easy to talk about. Then, Naruto spoke up. Guess I'll start. Sakura couldn't help but feel a mild dread that welled inside her as she looked between her teammates. The atmosphere was so heavy it seemed to weigh on them as if they were deep underwater. She should be glad. After today, Sakura would finally know why Naruto had been treated like he was, especially when he was the 4th son, and why Sasuke had flown off the handle just 2 weeks ago. She could understand wanting to save Naruto. She did too when she heard, but running off alone after someone who took out Kakashi-sensei. She should be glad she would finally learn about her teammates' burdens so that maybe she could help. She was, but she could tell this would be hard to hear. Naruto turned to her. You remember how my dad died, right? Sakura blinked, wondering what that had to do with anything. She frowned as she answered, well, of course. I mean, everyone in the village knows that. He and your mom died stopping the Kyuubi. Yeah, but has anyone ever said how? That drew her up short. She thought about it and realized that, no one had ever said how. But why did that matter? No, but what's that got to do with anything? He probably just killed it with some special jutsu, right? Not exactly, Naruto replied as he rubbed the back of his head. See, the only way to stop it was to seal it away. Okay, so what's that got to do with? Sakura trailed off, stunned, mouth falling slack as the pieces clicked into place. Why would the villagers treat Naruto like a pariah? Why would most of the people who should have recognized him avoid him? What did the Kyuubi have to do with Naruto? Sakura shrunk back a bit, staring at Naruto in horror. Wait, you can't mean. Yeah, he sealed it into me. I'm what you call a Jinchuriki. Someone with something like the Kyuubi sealed inside them, Naruto said finally. Sakura just stared, her eyes wide, her mouth moving with no sound as her brain struggled to process what she'd just heard. Images passed through her mind. Of villagers looking at the blonde like they wished he wasn't there. Of the many times they'd single him out if someone did something wrong. Teachers have punished him for no apparent reason. How could someone put their son through that? It took a few moments for her to realize she was staring. And to see the worried expression Naruto was giving her. He didn't think that she She ran forward and wrapped her arms around him, hugging him tightly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to go through. She trailed off, not sure how to express her feelings. He hugged her back and said, It's all right, Sakura. I mean, it's not, but I'm used to it, you know. Besides, I'm not on my own anymore. Sakura held him for a moment before that horror from before returned. How? How could the fourth do that? To his son. She pulled her face away, her eyes alight with anger on her friend's behalf. He must have known what people would think about you. How could he force this on you and then leave you alone? Naruto blinked, then smiled as he realized that's what she'd been so upset about. He shook his head. You know, that's one of the first things I wondered when the old man told me. He thought that he had no choice. Sealing it was the only way to stop it, and he thought he chose me because he believed in me. That he could trust me with it. Is that all? Sakura asked, still furious with the leader she'd looked up to for so long. She pulled back and put her hands on his shoulders, looking into his eyes. How can you just be? Sakura, Sasuke interrupted. She then turned to Sasuke, looking at him accusingly. And why aren't you saying any? And then it hit her. Wait, you knew. Naruto used the fox's power against Gaara. And he had a little chat with him over it before his siblings came to his rescue, Sasuke explained, closing his eyes. Trust me when I found out. I was mad at the village for treating him the way they did. But the fourth, we don't know why he did what he did, so I reserve my judgment. I don't care why. There's no excuse for putting your child through something like this. Then she blinked. Wait, why would you talk with Gaara about? Then her eyes widened. You mean, that thing he turned into? Yeah, small world, huh? Well, I guess it's not that much of a surprise, given what they were up to, Naruto said, causing her to go slack-jawed again. Speaking of, we weren't the only Jinchuriki there. The reason Fu came to try to stop Gaara is Sakura trailed off. Yeah, and from what I know, it's not normally kept a secret from the rest of the village. Naruto said. Sakura thought about the mint-haired girl. She'd been so happy to make friends and hang out with them. Was that why? She had no friends back in Taki. Because everyone looked at her and saw a monster like the Kyuubi. As she thought about what her friends went through, all the times she'd seen Naruto sitting on a swing alone as a child, the way everyone treated him, Fu's joy just from making friends, Sakura's vision blurred as pain grew in her chest. Geez, Sakura. It's all right. It's all in the past, okay, Naruto said, stepping closer. She hugged him again. She felt another hand on her and saw Sasuke had reached out to her in Naruto's shoulders. After a moment, he looked to their sensei. So, it's about time we had the full story. So Kakashi and Naruto told them about the Biju and Jinchuriki. The idea that there were 9 beings like the Kyuubi out there and that they were immortal did not favor her nerves, nor did the idea of people going through the loneliness she'd seen in those two. Then they got to Gaara. Whatever she felt about what the fourth put his son through paled in comparison to the disgust she felt at the Kage's choices. She never thought she'd feel sorry for the redhead before, but she hoped he got better from here on out. And then Naruto told them what he'd learned from Jiraiya about the Kyuubi attack and his mother. Kakashi cursed, putting a hand on his chin. He's right. The way the Kyuubi appeared. How did we miss that? But the only one ever known to summon and control the Kyuubi was. Sasuke breathed out, horrified at the implications. Sakura looked from him to their sensei. But that's not possible, right? He'd have to be dead by now. Right? She asked with desperate hope. I hope so, Kakashi answered grimly. We know Orochimaru was experimenting with immortality. Maybe Madara found a way first. Or he might have trained an apprentice. There were a few years between his betrayal and his final fight with the first Hokage. Sakura felt cold dread eclipse all of her other emotions. If half the stories about Madara Uchiha were true. He wouldn't say what he thought about it, but that's probably what the pervy sage was afraid of. I don't know why he didn't just come out with it, Naruto said with a frown, crossing his arms. Probably hoping to spare you the thought, Kakashi said. Sakura let out a shaky breath, wanting to change the subject when something else hit her. So, those guys that were after you. Yeah, They want the Kyuubi, Naruto answered. And all the other Biju, too. Sakura felt cold again as something else occurred to her. What happens if a Jinchuriki loses their Biju? We die, Naruto replied. Sakura gasped, staring at him, horrified all over again. And we're not going to let that happen, Sasuke said, his eyes hard. Sakura took a breath. Right. We're with you, Naruto. Next time they show up, we'll be ready. Once again, her mind flashed back to Wave and how useless she'd been. And now, when their village had been attacked, and when these new enemies showed up, she hadn't been there. Naruto and Sasuke had been fighting for their lives, and she hadn't been there to help. Never again. Sakura was never going to let her teammates down again. Naruto smiled, and she smiled back and nodded. After a few moments, Sasuke spoke up. Then I guess it's my turn, Sasuke said, drawing their attention and taking a deep breath. I've never talked about this to anyone. Something about his tone. Sakura could tell that whatever her crush had to say wouldn't be any easier to hear than what Naruto went through. A big part of why I went after Naruto was to save him. Obviously. But that aside, it was personal. Because one of those two was my older brother, Sasuke said. Sakura's eyes widened, and then she looked confused. Wait, brother, I thought you were the last Uchiha. Sasuke closed his eyes. The last loyal one. Because he's the one who slaughtered our clan. Sakura's hands went to her mouth as she took a step back. A glance at Naruto showed no reaction besides sympathy. He knew. It must have been when Sasuke went to help him. The last Uchiha of Konoha took a moment before looking to the ceiling, his gaze far away. I can't tell you how much I used to look up to him. A Chunin at 8, an Anbu captain at our age. He was the pride of the Uchiha clan. I wanted so badly to live up to him. He'd help me when I was stumped, train with me, carry me home if I overdid it. As a little kid, I worked myself to the bone to learn the fireball jutsu after I heard he had when he was my age. When I pulled it off, my father was impressed, but he told me not to be like Itachi. I couldn't understand why. His gaze hardened as he looked to the ground. Then came that day. I came home to find my whole clan was dead. I ran to our home. And there he was, standing over the bodies of our parents. Sakura gasped. She sensed Naruto jolt beside her and saw a matching expression of horror on his face. Sasuke shook his head ruefully. I asked him for help. I didn't realize, or maybe didn't want to believe it was him, until he told me. And then, the black-haired boy trembled, teeth clenched. He trapped me in a genjutsu. He made me watch as he killed them all. As he cut down our mom and dad after making them kneel in front of him. Sakura had heard enough. She ran over and wrapped her arms around him, like she had with Naruto. Why? Why had her teammates been through so much? Tears ran down her face. She felt Naruto join them. They stayed together for a few moments before pulling back. He let me go. He told me to run and come back for revenge. That's been my life's mission ever since. He scoffed bitterly. And now, he's part of this, Akatsuki. Haunting me again. We'll make him pay, Naruto said. We'll take him and all his new friends down. Sakura nodded firmly, determined to be there when they needed help. On his bed, Kakashi looked away, giving one of his eye smiles. Naruto sighed as he walked up the stairs to his apartment. It had been one hell of a day. It was nice having everything out in the open with Sasuke and Sakura. That said, he felt like he should have told them all this sooner. Before the exams, maybe. Speaking of talking things out, his mind was still reeling from what he'd learned about Sasuke. From what he'd done, he knew Itachi was a monster, but to make Sasuke watch the whole thing. No wonder he was so withdrawn. As if losing your whole family wasn't bad enough. Being betrayed like that, and then being forced to see. Naruto was determined to help Sasuke get payback for what Itachi put him through tenfold. But they all still had a long way to go before that. They'd stayed together for a while after leaving Kakashi to rest. Spent some time with the Harunos. And now, it was time to turn in for the day. Or so he thought. As he reached the top of his staircase, he suddenly heard rapid footsteps approaching. He tensed and turned, then his eyes widened, stunned, as he saw a familiar redhead barreling towards him. Karen. he yelped as she leapt at him, wrapping her arms around him. Hey, they finally let you out, huh? Yes, I'm officially a resident of Konoha now, she replied, smiling much more brightly than when he last saw her. They gave me an apartment on the next floor. Wow, Naruto's brows shot up as he grinned. Sounds like someone must have done them a favor. Awesome. In short order, the pair were in Naruto's little apartment. The blonde handed her a glass of water as he sat across from her at his table. I hope they weren't too hard on you, Naruto said. Karen shook her head. It wasn't that bad. Even when they were examining me, they treated me better than Kusa ever did. Naruto's face wrinkled at the memory of what his cousin went through. You didn't have to leave anything behind, did you? I didn't have much. Nothing I won't miss. I carried my mother's urn with me. That's the only thing I would have wanted. The blonde winced. Sorry that I brought that up. It's okay, Karen replied, looking down. Any idea what you're going to do? He asked, and she looked at him curiously. I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to be a ninja after everything. I don't know yet, the red-headed Uzumaki replied. Naruto, I know we're cousins, but we barely know each other right now. So let's change that. I want to get to know you. And hopefully, we can be family in more than just blood. They spent the rest of the night talking. About the small things. The big things. Nothing at all. It was a start.